What's the worst case of rich kid syndrome you've ever seen? I'm going to copy my post from a helicopter parent thread from a few months ago. I played football in the local kids league. One kid from another team was basically untouchable as his dad was a major sponsor of the league and would donate money for uniforms, drinks etc. His son was a pretty good receiver but didn't like getting hit, and his parents made a big deal of leaving their son alone so he can develop his skills. He was insufferable. Anytime he scored a TD, he would do over the top celebrations and mock all the other players, his teammates included. Then came high school. Most of the kids from the league ended up in one of two schools. He went to mine and some other players. During tryouts, he did well. The coaches were mostly focused on skills and minimal contact during the first few rounds of cuts. The final round was when things got interesting. Full contact was permitted, and he got rocked over and over again. No one was actually trying to tackle any harder than normal, it's just this dude didn't know what to do when he got tackled. So he screamed and cried a lot. He didn't make the team point until his dad came down to the school and offered to donate money for uniforms and some other goodies for our sports teams. So he made the team, and again we were told to take it easy on him a bit. So we did. But the other teams didn't. And he went up against some of the players he mocked previously. And they remembered. Our QB kept passing to him, and he was getting repeatedly smashed. Over and over again. It was the only time our team cheered for the other team. He quit playing football after that. Had a friend in high school whose dad was uninvolved. He was raised middle class like myself and lived with his mom and stepdad. After high school he worked towards becoming an electrician and was saving for his first apartment. His dad eventually came around when he was right out of high school and started giving him money here and there when he needed it. His dad owned a large company on the East Coast and was a multi-millionaire. Soon his dad convinced him to quit trade work and gave him a job at his business. Shortly after, he was promoted to a managerial position he wasn't qualified for and paid way too much. He'd get drunk while on conference calls and nobody questioned him since he was the boss's son. His dad bought him his first home, almost $500,000, and multiple cars. He took up horse racing and, quickly, we had nothing in common. Gone were the days of dumb teenage stuff, going fishing, hiking and video games together. He quickly found a girlfriend whose dad was a multi-millionaire. She was 30 and still putting everything on dad's credit card. I couldn't keep up with their lifestyle and very quickly we faded as friends. After his girlfriend and him broke up, she told me that he was actually severely depressed and almost drove his car off a bridge multiple times. Deep down he was having issues with wanting to live up to his dad's lifestyle and standards, but losing his old friends and life. It's too bad. I haven't seen him in probably 4 years now. We tried to reconnect a few times, but it just doesn't work anymore. Came back from a music festival in Southeast Asia, got VIP tickets. I swear this isn't about me. One of the other festival goers is a 20-something-year-old Asian girl who looks like she is straight out of the movie Crazy Rich Asians. This chick had a photographer following her around snapping pics of her posing in front of the stage with various acts, getting in the way of other people trying to dance. She asked security if she could get them to clear a section for her to get an unobstructed view of the stage for better photos. She bought a couple of bottles, 6, for her table and again, had the photographer take an incredible number of photos of her posing with her bottles of Martell and Jameson. She was incredibly rude to the wait staff, snapping her fingers, and in general talking to them like they were lower class citizens. She asked my mate and I, both Westerners, to hang with her and her mates at her table, and again, have the photographer take photos of her posing with us at the table. The other 2 guys from the group, both Asian, approached us when they saw that we're at a table, and it looked like we had made some friends. When they approached us, the girl and her friends got quiet, spoke amongst themselves in Indonesian, and basically shooed them away. We left them after they did that, and walked over to our friends. One of the guys is Indo, and he told us that she basically told them to get lost and know your place. Attended an international high school in Ho Chi Minh City, where a lot of new wave millionaires kids live. The school was ridiculous. A third of the kids were expats. Perfectly lovely kids. A third were local Vietnamese kids whose parents were working their ass off to send them to a private school, and the other third were these millionaire kids. They wouldn't ever hesitate to show off their mummy and daddy's wealth. They'd pull up to school in Lamborghinis, Ferraris, etc, etc. And if their Rolls Royce didn't come on time to pick them up after school, it would be a straight phone call to their other driver to come pick me up right now. Point, they'd be such dicks 24/7 to the non-rich locals, classist as kids, and constantly just bringing up the most trivial things and complaining about them. I'm literally not exaggerating here when I say this. For instance, my maid bought me the wrong LV bag. I told her it was the tan brown one, not the light brown one. Ugh, I can't believe it. Now we have to send her on the jet to Shanghai to get it. They all paid and used family connections to get into Harvard, Stanford, a Penn, etc, etc, and even now constantly complain on Facebook and Instagram about how crap their residence hall food was, so they just hired some faking personal chef or something. Mind you, these kids were the dumbest bunch I've ever seen. One of them literally was clueless about the most basic facts, but still got into business management. Points, despise the lot of them. Glad I'm in Europe, far away from most of them. My friend, Brooke Hanson, was kind of the opposite of this. I went to school with him in the UK. Son of Lord Hanson, who was very big in the 1980s. He had kind of toned down things that millionaire kids had. Mitsubishi sports hatches, tell her to come down and measure him for school clothes. But he was in fact very shy and modest. He was also adopted, and the mother, the frightful Geraldine, simply got bored of him and treated him like shit, but in an icy distant way. The family would, say, have Christmas in London or New York, and would always find some excuse for him to be elsewhere, like the Caymans or Florida, with plenty of money but all alone. They got it into his head that he was stupid and would never amount to anything, so they gave him enough money to live a playboy lifestyle, but no stake in the company, the Hanson Trust. The older brother, James, and his sister were all made shareholders and got executive roles. On his own, Brooke set up a helicopter taxi service for the company, which was quite successful, but when Lord Hanson died, this was immediately taken away from him and subsumed into some other branch of the company. He didn't get any shares, but was told that he would always have enough money to do what he wanted. So, what did he want? They wouldn't treat him seriously, and so he decided to just give up. He said he wanted his own plane, his own jet-assisted helicopter, a house in London and a villa in the south of France, and to be director of a model agency. He got all those things, played around for a few years, didn't have any real friends, just hangers-on, and then died of a heart attack in a London pub aged 50. My current roommate. I'm a senior in college and have been living in this apartment since the beginning of junior year. It's one of the nicer complexes around the school and close to the top of the price range, but I'm fortunate enough that my financial aid covers my rent and tuition. I still have to cover utility bills and food and transportation and everything else, though, and because of the nature of my job, my hours can vary from nearly full-time to less than 10 hours per week, with no real way to predict what next month will look like in that respect. My roommate has also been here since I moved in. Indian guy from Mumbai. Apparently used to go to my school, which happens to be a very large and very good school, studying photography, but either dropped out or failed out since he doesn't take classes anymore. He doesn't work either and stays up every night until 4 or 5 am while sleeping until 2 or 3 pm on the regular. He keeps virtually no food in the kitchen, instead opting for eating out for almost every meal, that is, unless he brings some of his friends back to the apartment without telling me beforehand, and playing awful mumble rap and European soccer games through the living room stereo until they pass out from drinking Fork's fancy liquor. After they all wake up, they slick back their hair and go play soccer until they decide they want more liquor and shitty rap. Point, we split the utility bills about 50/50, rounding in my favor since I manage the accounts. During the summer, the electricity bill for our 2-bed/1 bath apartment was more than $160 per month because he would leave the account running literally all day and all night, turning it back on after I turned it off. Right now, in winter, when it's not uncommon for it to be less than 20 degrees outside, I'll wake up to find all of the living room windows open after I turned the heater on the previous night. I've told him before that he's being incredibly inconsiderate because I pay for half of the bill too, not to mention wasteful, but he literally does not care. Why? Because his parents bankroll everything. They must be faking loaded for him to even be here, but they send him thousands and thousands of dollars every month so that he can sleep, drink, and hang with his bro friends. He also has credit cards from at least 4 different companies judging from our mailbox. And the kicker? He's hung me out to dry so many goddamn times on utility bills and other things he's owed me money for. We decided to go half in on our TV, and only after I ordered it did he tell me that he didn't have the several $100s he owed me and that I needed just yet, since his parents hadn't sent him money yet. Right now I'm waiting for his half of the utility bills that I paid for 2 weeks ago, which is not unusual in the slightest. One time he didn't pay me back until after I'd already paid the utilities for the next month. He's so incredibly inconsiderate and oblivious to the situation, and no matter how many times I've tried to talk to him about it, nothing's changed. I swear to God, he's turning me into a communist. Nobody should have that kind of coddling from their rich as parents. So there's this spot near where I live just off the freeway and up a mountain. It's a sort of maquilled point and all the kids go up there to drink, smoke, etc. My high school was full of kids suffering from affluence, totally the type to live their whole lives in a rich, safe, mind-numbing bubble and think nothing of it. The type to break their iPhone because they wanted a new one, to crash their first car, probably a BMW or Mercedes, and get a brand new one the next day, to expect the world to be given to them without earning it. When I was a senior, a junior went up there with a couple friends on a foggy night. Now I didn't know this kid personally, but I knew he wasn't up to any good. I'd heard stories about how much of an asshole he was, and I'd personally seen him snort coke at school, so obviously they were drunk, on drugs, or more likely both. He drives down the mountain like this, and can barely see anything because of the fog, then hits a motorcyclist coming the opposite direction and kills him. He got no kind of charges because, supposedly, the motorcyclist was drunk and on the wrong side of the road. Whether or not this is true, he took a human life and was underaged while under the influence and didn't have to do so much as community service for it. He didn't seem to feel any kind of remorse. He boasted, even. Or, more often, he would complain about the damage done to his BMW. A kid from my high school killed someone, and the greatest remorse he felt was for his car. 2 stories here. One about an actual rich person, and one about a poor person who, when we went to college, faked like she was rich. Rich friend story. So my best friend was rich, and always got what he wanted. His parents are rich, plus his father also works in a FedGov agency, so not only was he spoiled, he also had an endless get out of jail free card for petty crimes, graffiti, stealing shit, etc. One story in particular comes to mind. We went to get new skate shoes. I had a strict budget, and in efforts to be humble and on my level he bought some skate shoes within the price range I had mentioned prior to visiting the skate shop. When we got the store, he copped some globes and was thrilled. During that time, I decided to stretch my budget by like $30 more and get this pair of America shoes, which he actually hated on because he was a faking hater. Fast forward 5 days later, and literally the only thing he's talking about is how he wanted my shoes and I should have wanted his shoes. He was saying shit, like it's all your fault. I only got the globes because you told me you were going to spend $40 on shoes, and shit like I hate the globes. I would have gotten your shoes, but you got them instead. I couldn't faking stand it, over and over again non-stop, so we decided to share the shoes. The day he got the Americas was the last time I ever wore them. He literally hated the fact that I had more expensive shoes than he did. Meanwhile, I had no car and a job. He had a fake nice car, and to this day, has never worked. Fake rich story. I was living with my roommate in college. Both of us had our girlfriends living with us. Our girlfriends were cousins, so I knew his girlfriend very well. She was never rich growing up. In fact, her father was an ambulance chaser and welfare manipulator. have kids with his wife, but never get married for single mother benefits /etc. One day my roommate comes home with some presents from Victoria's Secret. He had spent around $250, and because he had spent that much, it came with a free gift, a sort of tote bag thingy. His girlfriend, being the wannabe rich beach that she was, had to make sure none of the items were on sale. Naturally she visits the website and confirms that the items were not on sale. Perfect. However, the tote bag was a free gift with purchase. I swear to God she was screaming at the top of her lungs, throwing things all over the house, and saying she'd like how dare you give me something free and more she'd like free sheet is for poor people. Then ended up breaking up. She also faked her voice and was one of those girls that put on her face daily. She married a bald doctor who is 10 years older than her somewhere random in the northeast. She dropped out of school, drunk post soroi for bad grammar laziness. At my tailor's shop, some young pup threw open the doors to storm in wearing nothing but a towel and a bad attitude. He demanded I start fitting him for new clothes immediately. I was kinda just standing there gawking, because like I said, he was literally wearing just a towel. When I didn't move right away to get started, he actually hit me with a "do you have any idea who I am?" I didn't, so I get started with fitting this brat for new clothes, and he tells me about the circumstances surrounding his current state of undress. Apparently, a host stole his clothes. She had taken them in an attempt to blackmail him into giving her more money. I was kind of surprised, because if it were me, my money would probably be with my clothes to begin with, so I asked him, "Wasn't your money with your clothes?" He looks shocked at the question. Certainly not. A gentleman's hand is never far from his purse. So my father says. Then he waves his money purse around in front of my face. I wanted to smack it out of his hand. He keeps going with his story. She told me if I wanted to keep my dignity, then I'd give her my purse and walk home wearing my clothes. He shook his head scornfully and continued to explain. A gentleman's dignity isn't in his clothes. If I handed over my purse simply to save myself an embarrassment, then I would be handing over my dignity. He looked thoughtful for a second, then spoke softly, like he came to some sort of realization. It only follows that a gentleman's dignity is in his purse then. I think I heard my father say something of the sort. Rela/im14th as a steep material point anyway. I finished fitting the little brat. Then he has the audacity to look me in the eye as he shortchanges me on the clothes he just bought. I tell you, rich kids are one of nature's great destructive forces, like floods or tornadoes. When you're struck with one of these catastrophes, the only thing an average man can do is grit his teeth and try to minimize the damage. The Chinese students at my private university were in a league of their own. Like, the average person there was bad enough, but they were in a league of their own, although I did come to know a few who were great, so obviously not across the board at all. They had their parents buy them ridiculously expensive cars to sit in student lots. They refused to talk to anyone that wasn't from China, and they were really disrespectful to lecturers by talking and browsing the internet. I guess it's not the worst story, but it was all the little things that seemed to get worse and worse as the year went on. Although my favorite story comes from a group of very white freshmen. I was completing a volunteer section of a class at a local juvenile corrections center, and while the group of juniors and seniors in my class were filling out paperwork for background checks, a class of freshmen also came in with their professor for another class. They had to start their applications and there was an uproar when they discovered they'd have to give their socials on the applications to work there. A lot of them had to call their moms to get the number, and one boy goes, "I'm not comfortable giving that information out." A girl asked if they were allowed to ask for it. "You're applying for a job. You're applying for a job in a jail. Really?" They had no concept of the need to provide their socials. They were offended by it. My class laughed about it for months. I can't even imagine going into college without having ever filled out a job application. I can't believe their parents sent them to school without thinking, hey, maybe I should explain this. Maybe I should give them a copy of important documents. It was crazy. I'm sure this will get buried, but a few years back I was a counselor at a super rich all girls camp in Massachusetts. The parents would pay $16,000 plus more if you wanted your kid to learn to ride a bike or a horse for 8 weeks at what was essentially a country club point. So I've grown up in Montana all my life. I was convinced that I would come in with some Montana tough love and teach these girls how to be good compassionate people. Welp, I was wrong. These girls were not just spoiled, they had entitlement ingrained into their DNA. I would get comments daily from these little sheets that they were better than me and that they didn't have to do anything that I said because they paid me and I was just a counselor. I had one girl who was 12 who came from a divorced home and one parent gave her an iPhone and the other a BlackBerry, and she would text herself from one phone to the other. One bragged about how her parents were going to buy her a nose job when she turned 18. One girl who particularly liked me kept saying that she would fly me out to New York after camp so I could be her nanny. It was especially bad on parents' and grandparents' days. We, the staff, were not allowed to be seen sitting or eating, and parents would whine to us about us not spending our own pitiful paycheck to buy their kids treats. Grandparents were especially bad because they were old money types and would try to one-up each other with their cars or chauffeurs. One set even landed their helicopter on our soccer field and drove around on their own golf cart all day. I shit you not. We even had a formal meeting before Grandparents' Day where the owner of the camp told us not to gawk when we saw an older man with a much younger wife who was clearly an inheritance hunter. My god, I could go on and on, but to answer the question, the most interesting thing I noticed about these rich little sheets were little things that were buried in their habits. For one, these kids didn't share, at all. They would have their own set of nice gel pens to write letters home, and if their best camp friend asked to use one, they'd say no. Second, you know how, if someone needs to cross a line of people perpendicularly, the normal thing to do is for you to take a step back for a moment to let them cross and then move back up into line? Not these girls. If they saw you coming to cross their line, as many as possible would crowd forward, so you'd have to pass behind them. Totally bizarre. I have stories for days about those little demons. There was a kid a year behind me in high school that I had in a Spanish class of mine who was obnoxiously rich in an already obnoxiously rich school. He would flaunt his money in the worst way, make fun of people's cloths, brag about the new stuff his parents bought him etc. I moved away once I left school and heard that in his senior year he got belligerent and showed up to our school's homecoming football game. He got into a fight, left the game, and on his way home drove his fanciest sub head on into a car filled with teachers from another school, killing 2 of them. He was 17. His dad was a super well-connected lawyer so no jail time, no scared straight, no ankle bracelet, just probation for killing 2 young women. I came home about a year after that and ran into him at a party where he was sheet-faced. He had been completely ostracized by everyone there for what he had done and had become a pariah. I talked to him a bit about what had happened and he clearly felt no remorse and resented how everyone had been treating him. I told him what a prick I thought he was, and he told me that I had no idea how much responsibility it was to be as important as he was. He drove home. Years later I looked him up and found that he had started giving talks at high schools, community centers and juvas about his experience and freely owned up to getting off too easily. I read an article he wrote about how it took him years to feel anything close to guilt, but that once he did, he changed the trajectory of his life. He seemed like a really good dude now. He contracted some crazy rare form of cancer soon after he changed course and died very quickly after it was made public. Some people are shitty and stay shitty, but some people see the error of their ways. We have to hope that all of the people talked about in this thread can grow the fuck up and live a productive and meaningful life like this kid tried to do. This story always makes me sad, happy, then sad again, but I'd like to think that people can grow. Oh man, just for this, I created an account and evolved from unregistered lurker to a productive member of this internet society. For the record, this is a 100% true story. As crazy as it all sounds, about 7 years ago I was a young, dumb, full of rum marine out in 29 Palms. Was in a barracks room with 3 other dudes. 2 of them had the same blue collar background as me. We got along great. The third guy, not so much. This kid was a skinny, shoulders perpetually hunched down Japanese/Jewish guy from an affluent city in SoCal, and both his parents were some bigwig corporate types. He was also a furry, so I'll refer to him as such. Immediately after we all moved into the bricks, we got a taste for who he is as a person. One of our guys had a TV, and as soon as Furry came in and dropped his junk, he grabbed up the TV and started going on about the best place to position it and how much we will all split the cable bill and stuff about HBO and blah blah. Totally threw us off until he got distracted by picking out the best secretary, dresses/desk combination in the room for himself. Day 1 down. Too many more to go. Time went on. Sometimes we interacted well with this kid, sometimes we didn't. He was just faking weird. All he ever did was sit and watch anime on his laptop. And if he wasn't watching anime, he was playing on his Nintendo DS. He never ate at the chow hall with everyone. He would literally sprint to Taco Bell, get his food to go, then sprint back, just to watch his anime in the room. Every single bleeding asshole colonic impasse day. Our NCOs would joke that when driving around base they had to be aware of coyotes and furry just sprinting across the road in front of cars. He also liked to lock us out of the room when we all left. And by lock I mean jam a faking chair against the doorknob so we can't open it from the outside. Just so he could continue to sit and watch his cartoons, and in point naturally we all made fun of him because we were members of the world's most elite fighting force and had the combined IQ of an aborted fetus, but we were only trying to help, I swear. We'd talk shit all the time. He'd talk shit back. I'd describe in detail all the times I used his toothbrush travel holder as a prostrate stimulate while I was jerking off in the shower. He'd get angry. Now none of us knew he was rich at this point. We thought he was just a weirdo who called us peasants and muggles, not kidding, and threatened to sue us to death. It wasn't until one day, when my roommate was out in the parking lot having a smoke, and probably harassing women, when he saw an ISIS Lexus sitting outside our barracks, and a guy who was standing beside it in a suit, that my roommate decided to walk over and ask him what's up. The suit guy says he's waiting for Mr. Furry. WTF bro, are you a fed here to arrest us for being weird? No, this suit man was Furry's family driver. Turns out every weekend, Furry was having the guy drive the 3 or so hours from his hometown to 29 Palms to pick him up and bring him home, just to get driven back Sunday nights. That's when we finally got it out of Furry that he was rich. His parents were CEOs, and the only reason he joined the Marines was because his father, a former Air Force officer, told him he couldn't get his inheritance unless he served. Well, this explained the peasant thing, and his general unwillingness to interact with us in any normal or positive way. He was constantly and obnoxiously telling us how rich he was, how much better he was than us, saying shit about our poor as family and just good old genuine uppity as behavior towards us. But the rich kid syndrome doesn't explain why he's a furry, but I'll go over that because I'm all hopped up on Mountain Dew. And on roll point one day Furry was being himself, and one of my roommates had enough. He was this big dude from Bama, and he jumped off his rack and was like, alright McFurry, I've had enough of your jawboning, let's rumble. See. Bama squared up, and Furry did something no one expected. He literally arched his back, made his hands into claws, and faking hissed like a cat. Bama said fuck it, and we all went to get trashed at the bar. Since Furry point at this time in history, none of us knew that the furry culture was an actual thing. We just thought he was autistic. But our curiosity loomed over us like a cloud. So the next time he did his chair 2 doorknob home alone sheet, we peeked through the window at him. Furry took a small bowl out of his secretary, filled it up with water, sat down in front of his laptop, and lapped at it like a kitty. We immediately started kicking the door and banging on the window, yelling and laughing like idiots because we didn't know what else to do. He reacted as we expected, straight denial and deflection. Life continued, just weird interactions, sheet talking, major revelations about Furry, such as his favorite form of exercise was practicing swordplay. As I'm writing this out, I'm also realizing he is an eckbird, so thanks for allowing me this epiphany. One day I was bored and horny and tired of his sheet, so after letting him run his mouth I decided fuck it and goaded him into a fight. Really infantile and useless of me, I know, especially because he couldn't fight to save his life. I blackened his eyes and busted his lip, and then right away went to one of my NCOs and told him, hey dad, furry and I just got into it, he's my beach now. I think I faked up, just giving you a heads up. Guy was like, what the fuck R0CK0 Rossum 3 thing, you big corn-fed Yankee hillbilly. To be honest, I was worried that furry was gonna go and blue falcon my ass or something, so that's why I immediately went to my NCO as damage control. Luckily it was taken care of in-house, and the most that came of it was our gunny asking furry the fuck happened to his face, to which furry said he got hurt practicing his sparring. Gunny asked if he was boxing. Furry clarified that he was sparring with swords. Gunny, then everyone goes their separate ways. Wasn't until a few years later that I see furry at another base. He was in a platoon with a buddy mine. I had grown up a little since then, so when I tried to say hey to furry and catch up, I was angered by his unwillingness to even look at or acknowledge me. So then I started to joke with my buddy and some other dudes about furry and our history, and that's why he acts like a beat dog around me. I must have done something right, because I guess he never had an air of superiority towards other Marines, never talked about his upbringing or his family, or whatever, so pretty much, that's the kind of heroes that are swearing an oath to support and defend the Constitution of this fine country and all of your freedoms. You're welcome for my service. Edit. Yes, I know I'm a dick who sometimes uses language and words that can strike some people's ears like lightning, and this story is rough and not a good perception of me, but I'm not advocating bullying. I don't know what I'm advocating. I'm just here for a good time. I was in most of the student boards and councils, and there were quite a few extraordinarily rich kids that would try to buy their way out of trouble or into special privileges. One of them, however, went through all the hoops, asking who he would have to talk to get a helicopter pad. I thought he was joking or wanted to perform some kind of prank, but I told him who he had to talk to. Lo and behold, a few weeks later, a construction team comes in to build a helicopter pad. Once the thing is finished, the mad lad actually starts coming to classes in his own faking helicopter. All because he hated traffic, and getting a driver wouldn't solve the problem. Nor will I ever voluntarily live in a housing project just to avoid the commute. This guy was glad I took his problem seriously, so he offered me a helicopter with pilot for my troubles. I said sure, thinking he was joking. Nope. Next faking morning, an actual helicopter lands near my parents' home, and the pilot gets out and rings the doorbell. I get in the helicopter and land on top of the school. The pilot takes off, and the dude's private helicopter lands a short while later. A month or so later, the construction crew comes in again. One pad really isn't enough. The other pilot had to divert to a field nearby. That's disgusting. The family of that guy was so loaded. The guy was completely out of touch with reality, but he did give the sickest parties and was very generous. For example, there was this girl in my class whose parents were working very hard to keep themselves afloat, but they just couldn't manage because of inherited debt. When Mr. Helicopter got word of it, a few things happened. A week or so later, the girl hugs him and starts crying, thanking him profusely. His reaction: I have no idea why you're thanking me. I know it was you who paid off my parents' debt. Nope, I think I'd remember doing that, but I'm glad to hear your parents are debt free now. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways. Okay, my turn. I feel pretty awful right now. As a high schooler, I have a ton of stories, because my school is that kind of school, but also my parents and they're divorced. See my posting history for details. Definitely have money, although I personally don't give a shit. Because of other reasons I try to dress normal, but it's kind of ridiculous to see all my classmates literally wearing designer stuff to school. For the record, I wear t-shirts with the names of places I've been on them, or sports team t-shirts with Gap jeans and a hoodie, or have them casually talk about buying a brand new pair of Jordans just because they can, and the old one soles got dirty. Now, my parents are divorced, and my dad has full custody. Again, beyond the point, but if you want background, check my post history. Because of reasons relating to my mom is faking psycho. She also has a habit of buying me and my sister, more so my sister, She plays favorites, insanely expensive and valuable gifts, like a Gibson SG complete with amp and all the gear save 4 pedals for me, a professional quality camera for my 11-year-old sister, and a full recording kit for me. It feels like she's trying to buy my love, and while I feel like I'm forced to accept these gifts because of their value and what they mean for me in terms of trying to be a musician, I don't particularly want them, especially as she'll demand I keep them at her place and all kinds of shit, and then tell me that, if I want it, I have to fight for more time with her in court. Like, what can I do? I was homeless and sitting outside on the sidewalk panhandling in the winter under a pile of blankets. I used to sit on Granville in Vancouver where all the clubs are, so I'd have to deal with a lot of rich kids flashing their money around trying to show off. For reference, I was about 22-year-old girl at the time. One night this guy, maybe about 25, in super nice designer clothing, walks up to me, clearly very drunk, and without even asking me, he sits down on my blanket beside me. Pro tip: homeless people very rarely want you to sit with them when they are trying to panhandle. He starts going on to me about how money doesn't make you happy, that he has all the money in the world, and he's still miserable. In fact, I should be lucky that I was homeless, because I was free from money and didn't have to worry about anything. Normally, when I panhandle, I just keep quiet and sit and read, and try really hard to be as polite as possible, because I'm so thankful for any donations. But this guy didn't give me anything, and his flashy clothes meant no one else would give me anything while he was there. Plus he was really starting to piss me off. I pointed out that money might not buy you happiness, but I'd be a fuck of a lot happier if I had something to eat and a place to live. He then started going on about how he wishes he could give away all his money. Keep in mind he's sitting there beside me sign and cup and still hasn't given me anything. Normally I never ask for money, but finally I was just like, you know what, if you hate all you money so much, maybe you could give me some, considering I have faking nothing and have to sleep outside in the snow tonight. He then got up and started making this big production, like, you know what? I will. That's how much I hate money. I'm going to give it all away to some homeless girl in the street. That's how much I don't care. He then pulls out his wallet, which is so full of bills it can barely close. Like, I've never seen so much money in my entire life. He spent several minutes rifling through all the bills, which are mostly $100s and $50s, and carefully pulls out a $5, the lowest bill in the Canadian currency, and gives it to me while saying God bless over and over again like he just saved my goddamn life. Then walked over to a bunch of girls to brag about how he just gave me money, and wasn't he just the best. A few hours later he came back over to me and asked me why I was still there, because he already gave me money. Fact, it'd be nice to be so rich that you're that far removed from reality. I work in a hospital. I've seen numerous occasions where the rich people ask for certain things and get annoyed when us common folk have to tell them we don't have that here. Sometimes they act like they can't fend for themselves, and other times they turn into big babies when they don't get their way. Of course, not all rich people act like this, but the minority in this group stands out a lot. One time a patient threw a fit over the food she got for lunch and demanded to speak to the head chef. When she found out that we don't have a head chef, she threw a fit and demanded that someone make her a caprese sandwich, and it has to be done the same way her maid makes it. We actually had to use Google to find out what the hell she was talking about. We told her she could have a ham, turkey or tuna sandwich. Then she asked to speak to the person in charge and was a piss, but when that person didn't cave into her demands, another time a patient refused to eat breakfast until it was cut up a certain way and called their parents to send the help, because no one in this hospital knows how to treat people. Mind you, it wasn't that she needed the food cut into smaller portions to give her an easier time. She wanted the food cut into certain shapes. I'm sorry guys. Hospitals aren't 5+ star hotels. My best friend had to kick out his roommate, and because of certain circumstances, I had the pleasure of helping him, figuratively, dropkick her ass out of the condo. Now, let me just start by saying that her parents were celebrities from back in the day. I won't say who they are, but they were well known. Unfortunately, they were also pieces of shit drug addicts who have influenced her behavior quite a bit. She hasn't really gotten many media attention herself, but only people close to her know who her parents are. And it explains everything. It all started when my friend needed a roommate. She was working as a chef. She was friendly, social, and everything seemed okay. She did have a sugar daddy, as she had some sob story about being cut off due to crashing her car, but had this new boyfriend who was 60 years old and paid for her lifestyle. Little by little it became apparent that she wasn't who she said she was. She wasn't this successful young adult that she pretended to be. She was just spoiled and would go great lengths to continue her lifestyle, such as sugar daddies. The kicker was, she wasn't allowed to live in his home because he had kids her age who hated her. Soon after this, we learned that her parents were well known. So my friend, he can be an idiot at times. He thought that it would be cool to have her move in, since her boyfriend would just pay rent in advance. His last roommate couldn't pay rent, so he figured, great, I'll just have this broad move in, and I won't have to worry about that sheet. And at first, despite the spoiled rich girl sheet, she seemed like she was cool. We'd all go to brunches, bars. It was pretty obvious she liked all the finer stuff. Because of her parents, she would get us into concerts and whatnot. She would get us into these house parties on Palm Beach Island. She would, on a whim, get pets and then take them back. She would do this a lot. Or, this puppy is so cute, I have to have him. Then she would bring him back because it was too much work for her. The only pet she managed to keep around was a hamster, which she couldn't even be bothered to be at home to feed. She would reach out to my friend, or in some cases me, if my friend didn't respond, because she was out on one of her 3-day drug benders again, and oh my god, someone please feed him. So then we would have to go into her room, find this faking hamster that's been rolling around in the bowl, praying we are not about to happen upon a dead hamster, and feed the poor thing. Things took a real turn when we noticed she was bringing all sorts of guys to her room all the time, always drugged out. She was in this relationship with this grandpa figure, but kept bringing guys back to her room. Point, she was whoring herself out online. She had this whole story about how she used to be a cool girl, with themes of oh, I know better now, even though it was clear that her job wasn't going well, and she's clearly faking dudes for money. No, they're just my friends. Like, oh, okay, suddenly you have all these dudes parading into your bedroom and you're going to pretend like you both go way back. Even worse, we learned that she was a kleptomaniac. She couldn't bear the thought of getting a job, getting her food from Aldi, or making a few sacrifices here and there. Instead, she decided to start stealing. She was caught stealing lobster tail and wine bottles from a supermarket, and her mugshot was posted to social media. She made a habit of going to places like Whole Foods and stealing cheese platters. She was arrested for larceny after stealing thousands of dollars worth of product from a resort spa. She has an open warrant for this right now because she never showed up to her hearing. Note that this girl was 22 and had painted herself to have this big career as a chef, working for wealthy people. It turns out that she just went through the motions of culinary school, funded by her parents, so that she could post sheet to Instagram. Then she became a co-owner of a high-end shop. She never owned it. She just makes friends with those at the top and tells people that my friend decided to kick her out after she wouldn't stop doing drugs in the house, kept bringing her prostitution bullshit around, and he wasn't having it. Point, it is a year later. She is now claiming to be the owner of some natural wellness company. She's never an employee. She's always an owner, and it lasts 4 months at best. She is in her early 20s and has never worked, and she thinks she can convince everyone she's an entrepreneur. But the thing that strikes me the most worrisome is that she just had a baby. She's been on Instagram gallivanting about how she's had a natural birth with a midwife. She's a lover of essential oils and all that new age bullshit. The same person who couldn't keep a hamster alive and let it roll around in her bedroom for days on end. Somehow she believes that she was of sound mind to have a baby and was educated in the ways of home childbirth. I helped move her sheet out of the condo, and let me tell you, we had so much fun just taking her sheet and tossing it out. She came to collect most of it. She ended up leaving behind a bunch of skin products, keratin hair products, Lush bath bombs and whatnot, which I ended up collecting those myself. Come to think of it, they were probably stolen, so maybe I'm the asshole after all. Oh well. Point, edit. TLDR, her parents were rich drug addicts and she went around acting like a complete cunt. I don't know if this counts as rich kid syndrome because she a full grown adult. But I have mom friend who grew up wealthy and married a man with a good job. Now her husband is having migraines and they are going to the university for experimental treatment that isn't covered by their insurance, and it is a good chunk of money each month to pay for. But they are still way better off than my husband and I. She complains to me about their finances all the time. She was telling me what they bought for their daughters for Christmas, and it was freaking ridiculous. Huge doll houses and dolls to go with, and lots of other things. Meanwhile my husband and I are pitching in to build our daughter a dollhouse out of scratch wood, and I could only buy her a couple dolls on clearance. She complains that they can't afford to send her daughter to the preschool we send our son to because they make too much money to get financial assistance. We are so poor he goes for free. She tells me how lucky we are to be so poor that our son can go to preschool for free. She makes comments about me being so thrifty as if it's my hobby and not a necessity to survive. After complaining to me about never having it so hard financially and not knowing how to handle it, she then told me they are going to hire a maid service to clean their house regularly and a landscaper to redo their whole yard. The one that really gets me is she often says, if it were your husband dealing with these migraines it would ruin you financially, we would have to do a GoFundMe or something. And I want so badly to say, if it were my husband, we wouldn't be going to the university for expensive experimental treatments, he would just be sucking it up, like he does with his medical problems he currently has. We can't afford his hip replacement he's needed for 2 years, so he just hobbles to work on a bad hip. It's like she has no freaking idea what it is like to be actually poor, and then tries to compare us, now that she has to think about money a little bit, and can't just blow it on whatever they need whenever. I used to live in an apartment before I moved. I usually had a friend come over and take of it when I was deployed. I came home one day from a deployment and my friend told me I have new neighbors, a family who were rather wealthy from all the sheep they had. I usually get a week off before I head to my regular work, so I pretty much dick around, gaming, playing with my dog, hang out with my girlfriend and my friends, and whatnot. I came home from one day from a friend's party to find out someone broke into my flat and my dog missing. The couple come out and yell at me that my dog attacked their son. I asked them if their son broke into my flat cause if he did then they have no right to yell at me cause I have a warning sign outside my door which says I have a dog. They said that he wouldn't do that. I decide to check my camera. I have a camera which points directly at my door in case someone decides to visit my flat. Sure enough the kid did break in and tries to beat my dog as he tries run off with my PC, and my dog attacked him. Since he had no right to be in my flat and my dog is rather friendly, but would defend if needed. I called the police and reported it. They said they took my dog to the kennel, and the kid had to go to the hospital cause of the dog bite. Thankfully my dog didn't have rabies, and they did notice the camera, but didn't have any way of accessing it. They mentioned that they tried to call me. I mentioned that I had my phone was turned off cause I was at a friend's BD party. After almost 2 hours of talking to the police and the family, I got my PC and my dog the next day. 2 weeks after this happened the rich kid he was decided to get his parents to sue. When we went to court, I just showed the judge the videotape and a picture of the broken door. I won and had them pay me back the $300 it cost me to fix my damn door. I worked with the president's son at my last job. Was working at a small, 500 employees, family-owned company, so not Fortune 500 or anything but still a net worth in the millions. Him being the 4th generation in the family business, he was born in that money and never knew anything else. According to him, he was a normal kid growing up, never received any special treatment of any sort. His words, "I only got one present at Christmas." I think he honestly believes that, but the truth is his silver spoon is so far down his throat, he can probably feel it between his butt cheeks. Here are a couple things I've seen him do or say. I was talking about what I'd do if I won the lotto with a cow walker and said I'd invest it and live off of the interest. He piped in and said it's impossible for someone to live off of 50k annually. Never mind that the rest of us made below 40k. I watched him spend over 20k over 3 months on his dog, his bike and his car, most of it unnecessary, then complain that money was tight and he couldn't afford to travel, so he'd have to spend his vacation using his parents' boat. Instead, he just sold his house, kept telling everyone about how he's happy about it and he can do stuff with that money. That house was originally purchased and paid for by his dad. While he was studying away from home, he went to university in engineering, dropped out, went to France to study cooking, came home and opened his own catering business, all of it bankrolled by his dad. He would brag about all the money he'd make with that business. His clients were all his dad's rich friends, but omitted to mention that he had to quit because his dad told him he was done bankrolling a business that was always losing money. Probably more stuff I can't think of, but he was pretty bad with it. Compared to all the other examples it doesn't sound too bad, but it was really annoying to the team and me. Few years ago I worked in a bar, and we had this dude come in for a trail shift behind the bar. I was a bartender there too. First thing I noticed was his watch, a big, shiny, newish looking Rolex. I asked him to take it off because A, we don't wear watches behind the bar, and B, we don't wear watches behind the bar. He didn't make a fuss about, but he did want to talk about his Rolex and his money all the time. It was pretty obvious he was a rich kid. His dad was loaded. He came to work in his dad Maybach, I shit you not, and referred to it as the old car. He was never really braggy about it in your face, never once actually mentioned that he was rich, but he bragged about it by carrying a Rolex or driving his dad's old car, which happens to be a Maybach. At some point I asked him, look, obvious you are rich, why are you working here? And he was pretty honest about how having rich parents had led to him not really being able to make normal friends, the kind that are there for you, not for your money. I kinda felt bad for him and appreciated his efforts of getting a job like this. In order to gain some friends, however, he'd still use his money to gain friends. Whenever we went out for drinks with the staff, he'd be buying bottles of expensive bows that Noon had asked for. He'd never let anyone get around, and always offered to drive people around in his Maybach. I explained to him, a number of times, that by doing these things he would only get people to like him because of his money, which he didn't seem to understand. Said he was just trying to be friendly. Tried to teach him that friendliness doesn't come from Visa, it comes from listening, talking, kidding around with someone, and helping out with non-monetary stuff, or in some rare cases, with a little money as well. Point kiddo didn't understand him and kept buying people shit. The managers liked him because at work he'd spent a bunch as well, buying a bottle of champagne when they were done and drink it with them. I think, from the bottom of his heart, he really wanted to make some friends, but he just didn't know how to. In his world, money has always been the key to get shit done. On the rare occasions I did get a good one-on-one with him, I noticed that he was pretty lonely. I tried to befriend him, but every time I got close he'd wave a wad of cash in my face, sometimes literally. A few months in he quit, writing a long message in our group WhatsApp how he was sad about not being able to find real friendship, and how he started to notice that people were only after his cash and liked him for his wallet. It felt a little sad for him, as he just wanted to make some friends, but didn't know how to. Hired someone out of drug court for a server position. Part of her work release deal included her having to live in a group sober living home. This poor girl was lost. She grew up so spoiled, she didn't understand that she needed to do laundry to keep her uniforms fresh. She thought we gave her a new uniform every shift. One of her roommates worked with us and told me that this girl expected a maid service at the sober living house. She learned to contribute to chores. She learned that she had to contribute for utilities. At the job, she learned that making $100 for a 4-hour shift was actually good. No, this isn't a $500k a year job, but if she learned the skills, she could move forward to something better. She did. She legitimately couldn't handle serving other people. It was a huge shock to her system. Someone wanted a refill and she took it, like he insulted her whole being. Nah girl, it's just water. She was a nice girl with very rich, but shitty parents. Before she worked with me, she had a job repping for her dad's pharmaceutical company, 6-figure income, and access to opioids. She stole thousands of dollars in opioids to get high, and her dad did nothing. In fact, to get her to stop stealing from the company, he would get a personal driver to pick up heroin for her. Yeah, disgusting. She still got to keep her job too. She was arrested for calling in a bomb threat at her old high school, and her parents couldn't buy her way out of the trouble she was in. Drug court was the deal. To keep her out of prison. She is 2.5 years sober now, had a baby at 35 with a down-to-earth gym manager, living her best life. She still has rich girl personality, but she did the work to become more independent, and she has minimal contact with her family. I know this is the opposite of the question asked, but I knew a guy in college who was the most low-key rich person I've ever met in my life. He lived in a nice, but not over-the-top, apartment with a roommate who was a mutual friend of both of ours. Dude did his own shopping, took public transport all over the place, went to his classes, did well in school, and was just a generally chill and pleasant dude. He was the type of guy who would buy a round of beers or shots at the bar for everyone in the group, or order late night pizzas for everybody, wherever we ended up afterwards. Things where you'd think that was super nice of him, but not whoa, this guy is faking loaded. The way he lived his life, I just assumed his parents probably helped him out a bit. Maybe they paid for his apartment and tuition, but nothing super crazy. All around solid dude. At the end of my junior year I was over at their place and I noticed an old picture of a former, very famous NFL player hanging on the wall. I figured he was a fan of the team, and asked if that was his favorite player. He just replies, "Oh no, that's my dad." Turns out this guy's family was loaded, as in way more money than whatever number you're thinking of right now. He was super open about it too. I assumed since his family was so wealthy, maybe he was embarrassed about it, or maybe he was worried about people only befriending him for his money, which is why he lived like he did. But he explained to me that his parents had always made sure he understood the value of a dollar, and how fortunate they were. He really took it to heart, and used his advantage to be generous to his friends. Apparently he volunteered in the community a lot as well. Anyway, I haven't spoken to the guy in years, basically the exact opposite of every other person in this thread, so I thought I would share. A guy I work with was telling me about a job his rich parents gave him for when he leaves school. It's a fairly easy, high-paying role, which is usually really hard to get into. This job could kickstart his future with minimal effort. It's a huge opportunity, and I'm very happy for him. He's excited too. The thing is, the poor dummy also seemed ashamed of his position. Having the job handed to him by his parents is viewed as shameful by him because he values hard work and he hates the thought of being given a free ride where other people struggle. He was also worried that he would be judged by his peers for having the job handed to him and seeming like a privileged rich white boy. He literally said those words. I laughed hard at the absurdity of it. I just cracked up laughing. Mayo. This guy is chill, hardworking, and completely deserving of any free rides life can offer him. He's cool as. I had no idea his family was wealthy until he mentioned this dilemma of his. He's so chill. That attitude of feeling ashamed to use your wealth/privilege is ridiculous. I understand where that attitude comes from, rich, spoiled heirs and heiresses, but it is entirely undeserved in this case. His parents gave him the job because they want him to be successful, and they believed he would be good at it. He wasn't handed the role for nothing. And it's clear from his attitude towards work that he was raised to work hard, and I think that deserves respect. He's a chill person, and nothing about him screams privileged rich kid. I told him to ignore anyone who talks shit about him or his family, and simply focus on doing the job right. If he chooses to take it, he doesn't have to prove shit to anyone. Nobody has the right to judge him. He should live for himself first, and others second. Rich kids, if you've also struggled with this feeling, please understand that you are not defined by your bank account. You owe nothing to anyone. Use the power and opportunities you have to secure yourself a good life, and try to be a good person in return. That is your right and responsibility as much as any poor person's. Being rich doesn't make you less human. I don't know how many people actually deal with this insecurity, but I'm telling you, fam, it's not fair on you. Hopefully you read this. I live in a rural county. The county was looking for property near the county center to build a new school. The land they purchased ended up being 5 miles from the county center. Nowhere close to the middle. Turns out, the land they purchased belonged to the father of one of the county supervisors. Public records show he paid $176,000 for the land. Only 2 years later, the county bought it from him for $880,000. They had been discussing buying land for about 3 years. It's pretty obvious his son knew they were building a new school, so he told his dad to buy the land. Our local newspaper ran the story on the front page. They put the front page on Facebook. People were upset because it wasn't in the center of the county, and the county already owned a property closer to the center than the one they bought. I commented and added link to the county land records showing who owned it. It got a lot of attention. A guy commented on my comment, basically saying I was an asshole for bringing it up because they were a good family of hard-working farmers that had provided countless dollars to an otherwise depressed local economy. He was almost worshipping these corrupt bastards. Then another guy commented and asked him to tell everyone who his dad was. He commented probably 10 more times without answering the question. I looked on his profile. His dad is also a member of the board of supervisors. His dad is head of the finance committee that approved the purchase. I don't think this guy was involved. I think he's honestly just an idiot that believed his friends are entitled to the taxpayers' money. He actually thinks this family of farmers are bringing money and jobs to the county somehow. In reality, they are extracting the county's resources using migrant labor and using their power as the owners of large tracts of land to cut their own taxes and make backdoor deals that rob the taxpayers blind. He is just a rich douchebag son of a rich douchebag who was born into a world where corruption is commonplace. It pains me to say it, but my wife had a case of this. Hard. Her dad is a vile, controlling, borderline psychopath of a human, but he's also worth a fortune. I've known her since we were teenagers and she just rolled around with one of those black American Express cards buying literally anything she wanted. She once got so annoyed that her weed dealer wasn't answering his phone that she went to Heathrow Airport with her then girlfriend and just flew them both to Amsterdam. This sense of entitlement carried on later into life to the point that she just openly spent, that is stole, other people's money. I put her on my Amazon account, and one day I came home to find that she'd bought a laptop using my card because it was the default one, and she didn't consider that she needed to actually use her own money to buy expensive items. That was quite a conversation, and not in a good way. She's genuinely neither a bad person nor actually intellectually stupid. She just grew up with absolutely no understanding of the value of money. She was a junior journalist and earned some ridiculously tiny salary, but it didn't matter because it was just pocket money. She's not like that anymore because her dad cut her off for being gay. As I said, he's a horrible person. So now we actually have to have a budget and pay a mortgage and things. However, when we decided we only needed one car, she didn't actually know that second-hand car dealerships existed, so thought she was going to have to sell hers on eBay. I literally cannot understand how somebody can reach their late 20s without having any understanding whatsoever of the concept of a budget. As I said though, reality has indeed ensued, and she's not like that anymore. My mom used to clean houses of pretty wealthy families and I went with her and usually waited in the car and played Gamma Boy or helped her out if she let me. One time the son of one of the families roughly my age, 10, at the time, saw me and wanted me to play with him. Sure, whatever, I asked my mom and she said it was fine, just to not do anything bad. We were playing video games in his room when his mom walks in and tells him to take a shower because they were going to a party later. This kid blows the fuck up, grabs his box, smashes it into his TV, grabs a batter, smashes his mirror to his closet, and then smashes his PS2 with it. I'm about to punch this kid for being disrespectful at the start, but my mom just grabbed my hand and pulled me in the hallway. Anyway, tantrum is over. Kid gets ready and the lady gives my mom $5,000 to buy another set of TVs, box, and PS2. So that he doesn't get angry when they are back from the party. She could keep the change. My mom talks to her, asks her if she can do anything to help. Lady says that the kid's just a piece of shit and that his dad is coming to get him at the end of the month anyway. My mom bought the new TV, box, PS2 and cleaned up the room. She kept the change, but she never took me back to that house because she was afraid the kid would hurt me in a tantrum. Point that day she did buy me a Game Boy Advance that day, so it was quite an upgrade. I used to live in the same building, university accommodation, as a rich guy, and the things he said and did in our shared kitchen were unbelievable. Essentially, this guy had grown up with servants. He didn't know how to take care of himself. Here are some things about him: couldn't even recognize food when he'd made it. He made an omelette and had to be told that what he'd made was an admittedly small omelette. When he figured it out, he immediately texted a picture of it to his mother because he felt so competent all of a sudden. He was obsessed with sex and would live vicariously through others by asking them about any recent sex that they'd had. He had the most boring year ever because those who were interested in sex were all too busy with university to have any point. He thought that any problem could be solved with money, and he was absolutely certain that we were all poor people who couldn't afford basic expenses. If anybody was going shopping, he would offer money so that we poor people wouldn't have to pay with what little money we had. He would get offended and throw a tantrum in the middle of the shop if we refused, no matter how politely. He was apparently bought a brand new BMW when he was 15. He doesn't like to drive, so he never uses it, but he brags about it anyway. He was mollycoddled so badly that he couldn't handle insults, no matter how minor. He was also so detached from society that he couldn't recognize sarcasm at all. Everything was an insult, not a well-meaning jibe, and everything deserved one of his famous tantrums. He couldn't clean up his own messes, or rather, he wouldn't. He refused because that wasn't a job that a man like him should be doing. He would put lids on his saucepans, only for whatever was in the saucepan to explode up the wall, the lid blowing off in the process. On another occasion, he placed chicken into the oven. However, the packet did not explicitly state that the chicken needed to be put on a tray, so he presumed that it didn't need one. He put it on a rack, and by the time he came back, it was as black as charcoal. In both cases, he left his mess to harden with the excuse of "there's no way I'm cleaning that." That's the problem of other people. He fully expected us to clean his messes, and he left the kitchen in such a state that we had to beg housekeeping for help because none of our cleaning products would remove the chicken and grease from the oven. This put one of our 2 ovens, in a flat of 10 people, out of commission for a week, and we were fined for having to ask housekeeping to fix his mess. This man is trying to become a doctor. Run for your lives. I'm in my 40s, and what I've seen a lot of are adults, 20s, 30s, and 40s, who want to live a nicer lifestyle than they and their spouse can actually achieve on their own. Their parents basically supplement a very nice and cozy lifestyle to the point where they never work harder to become financially independent. They just basically feel entitled to the extra supplement. 1. Family I know. All the kids are actually around my age. None of them are financially independent. Their dad, who is close to 70, is literally supporting himself and his wife, plus his 3 adult children, their spouses and grandkids. He offered to pay for college for all 3 of his kids. All of them refused to go to college. Why go to college when mom and dad will always provide everything? Another family, their daughter got a fluff college degree. The only job she was able to get was as a server. She lived in a nice apartment in Manhattan, pretty much on his dime, then decided to move to SoCal to pursue her career. Still not independent, basically has a job as an assistant, but not living the lifestyle of someone who is an assistant. She is in her 30s now, and no sight of every not depending on her parents. Their son, who has a PhD, only wants to live in high-collar areas, and his wife is coddled too. When they bought a new SUV, it had to be an Audi, because they wouldn't dare be seen driving a non-luxury car, even though they could afford a regular SUV. But mom and dad basically paid for the Audi. They also now have a child, which they use to milk their parents of even more money. They brag about how successful he is, but it's just weird that, if he's so successful, why are they having to supplement his income so much? Whatever happened to sucking it up and living economically? None of these kids had student loans, so that was a huge advantage already. Yet another family, kids all in their early 30s and late 20s. None of them fully independent. the one who has the most stable job, moved back home with her husband. They basically live and eat rent-free at their parents'. Their other daughter is married with 3 kids, wasn't motivated to finish college. Even though they paid for it, they have had to push her to finish school, and she still hasn't taken her boards yet. Probably going to get a divorce. Husband is a loser. Parents bought her a house. Not just any house, but a pretty nice house. They are annoyed that she is so complacent, yet they don't see how they have played a role in this. They provide free childcare all the time, even though their daughter is a Sam and not working yet. Then their youngest one has other issues, still acts like a kid and lets his mom take care of everything. He lives loose, but they had to make all of his living arrangements for him, and I suspect paying for his living situation. Even though he is employed, he's dating someone with a ton of issues due to a dysfunctional family, and now his parents have taken on helping his girlfriend's dysfunctional family too. Mostly, I see a ton of people my age whose parents gave them $ for houses bigger and nicer than they could afford, buying them cars, paying for their vacations, providing free childcare for grandkids. And you know what? These people do not realize how great they have it. I came from a family that could have helped me a lot more. I'm thankful that my parents paid for my college, but my husband had college loans. We paid those off, worked to save up money to buy a house, didn't even go on vacation until 5 years ago, married for almost 20 years. We have kids, we pay for all of their needs, we pay for our own house and cars, and live within our means. It was at the point where my husband and I were wondering what we were doing wrong that people were driving nicer cars and buying nicer houses and going on fancy vacations that we finally put the dots together that these people were living off of financial gifts / supplement / help from their parents, and they are not new grads trying to get a start. These are people who are in the late 30s and into their 40s. My husband's boomer coworkers have commented more than once that they wish that they had adult children like us, meaning we, adult, and don't burden / rely on their financial help. We do not depend on our parents for basic stuff. I always thought that this is what adulting looked like, but I guess that we're the weirdos. The last company I worked for, Greenhouse Growers, was family owned, and the owners were still involved in the day-to-day. The husband oversaw production, where I was a supervisor. He was kind of a dick, but overall approachable. The wife oversaw sales, and was very nice but pretty neurotic. She was second in THE company, and had to answer to her husband. They had 3 adult children. The oldest lived out of state, but was on payroll as a recruiter. The middle child worked for the company, and was the graphic designer. She was my favorite. She probably got paid too much, but she at least earned her paycheck. She would put on long hours and even weekends. The youngest was 18 and had already quit college after the first semester because he had a panic attack. So he moved back home and was put to work under me. Nice kid, but definitely would rather been at home in his parents' mansion ordering Postmates and playing video games than moving heavy stuff around in a hot greenhouse. By the time his first review came around, he had actually improved quite a bit. But relative to other people in his same position, he was still well below average. I gave him an honest review and set up an official plan to help him improve even more. He was receptive and seemed excited. The dad thanked me for not holding back. He acknowledged that a lot, not all, of his other kids' supervisors would definitely treat them like the boss's kids and they'd get perfect reviews. The mom, however, moved him into an office job under her guidance because she didn't want me to break his confidence. So, not really rich kid syndrome, more like overprotective mother who happens to be rich syndrome. I never really meet a rich kid, since Sweden is a really fair country. It's basically the more you earn the more you have to pay, and everyone here must pay their bills. There's no exception. Anyway, about 1 year ago I was sitting in the bus on my way home from college. I was sitting about in the middle of the bus, and had an elder a bit behind me. Furthest back was 2 siblings, about 8 to 9 years old, with a straw and some beans. I noticed that they were blowing beans towards the elder for fun. I didn't do anything, since it wasn't my business, but neither did the elder, which made me feel bad. The elder was about to drop off, and when she did, a very beautiful my age lady appeared and was seated in front of me. Then the kids started blowing beans at me instead. That's when it hit my trigger. Since they acted violently against me, I had the right to do self-defense, and took action. I went back to them, and instantly dragged their ears for about 1 minute straight. They cried and screamed so hard, that the beauty came towards me, and wonder what happened. I was about to tell her what happened, before one of the boys said, "Hey girl, nice boobs, wanna live with my daddy?" She was extremely furious at that point, and just left them in torture by me for another minimum. When I released them, they pick up their phone to call their dad, who they threatened me to be in the military, and that he could shoot and kill me anytime he wanted to. I didn't flinch, and as they called him, they explained everything through extremely obvious lies, saying I was some kinda mega badass with shotguns with arms, and threatening to kill them. He later told them to give the phone to me, and thankfully he had honor and a polite heart to hear my part of the story. When the kids came home they would gain a massive spanking point, but that's not the end of this story. When I was finished them, I stayed in the back making sure they didn't do anything stupid. And when I stare, it's like I'm a monster. They saw me as some kind of child murderer at that point. They ran forward and sat down where I previously sat down, right behind the beauty. They started harassing her the moment they sat down, so I had no other choice to sit down next to her. I explained what happened to her, and she was reasonably to talk to, so much that the siblings thought she was my girlfriend. Honestly, I wished point then the children arrived at the stop and they ran away as quickly as possible. I was super happy seeing how scared and cowardly they looked. I was a second generation high school student, first gen college student. My family was absolutely poor, but I got lucky and got some good scholarships and some bad loans, and went to college. I was accepted into the honors program, which I had to interview for on campus the week after I was accepted as a student. The whole weekend was basically the college trying to schmoz us and our parents with fancy food and presentations. They separated the students from the families for meals and I just didn't fit in with all these rich kids. They were talking about how their parents were French ambassadors or surgeons or some shit. The icebreaker at my table was, how many countries have you been to? Does Canada count if you live 5 miles from the border? I ended up taking it because they offered me $10k more in scholarships and these awesome dorms. Suite style, with a living room, and my bedroom had its own bathroom. All through college I never had to share a shower with more than one person, thank God. The dorm was honestly pretty nice compared to my house, but my suite mates would constantly complain about how terrible they were. I was glad I had the only room with its own bathroom, because the other shared bathroom was honestly gross half the time, because none of them knew how to clean after themselves. I decided I wasn't gonna clean up after them, so I straight up said, since I don't use the bathroom, I'm not touching it. I found out they ended up paying some non-honors freshmen to clean and do their laundry because they didn't know how to do laundry. Basically hired some kids to be their maids. I ended up getting so fed up with the kids in the program. Like, yeah, they were all pretty smart and the classes were interesting, but they had no knowledge of the real world, and decided to make it mandatory to study abroad during a January term to stay in the program following a vote from us. I ended up finding out that my additional scholarships were not contingent on me actually staying in the program, so I left it. I would have loved to study abroad, and we had a sister campus in Budapest that had tuition and housing exchange, but I couldn't afford the plane ticket / food over there. I'm so glad I didn't have to deal with those kids anymore, lol. When me and my long-term boyfriend broke up, my best friend was very wealthy, but never really boasted about it. Most people didn't know she was rich until they got close to her. Until I went to her crying when my nearly 10-year relationship ended. We were early 20s at the time. And her advice? Run away to Ireland for a month, come back a new woman. I figured she was joking, so I laughed and said, how on earth would I afford that? She deadpan looked at me, very serious, and told me it's not very expensive. I want to point out just the flight would be close to 800 plus taxes and all those other charges, plus food and somewhere to sleep. I was going to school full time, working full time and barely making each bill at the end of the month. Point also, now that she's older, it's actually gotten worse. For her birthday every year she goes away for 2 weeks and always asks me to come, which I can't afford. If she has a breakup or anything negative happens in her life, she's on a plane somewhere. and she tells me I gotta loosen up and live a little more. Edit. Just thought of another story. One of my job while in school was cleaning for some real rich people. 16-year-old got a Rolls Royce Phantom for his birthday and we were cleaning / helping them set up for his birthday party. I heard him on his phone while I was cleaning, bitching about how they didn't even get the right interior color he liked. I worked at a summer program for high school kids for 4 summers. It was a college experience program where we lived in dorms. They took college courses. Some did offer 1 to 2 credits that showed them what college life was like. We had a ton of very wealthy kids because it cost like $5,000-15,000 to attend. I've got lots of these stories. Girl from New York couldn't figure out how to get along with her roommate who was from Turkey. As an icebreaker she bought them both iPads. Groups of students going out to eat every meal because the dining hall food wasn't good enough. They'd spend $20 each meal and dinner was usually more expensive. One student bought an expensive bottle of cologne, but it was too big to take home in his carry-on. Instead of packing it in his checked bag he gave it to me since I drove myself Taxi from the dorm to campus because walking down the hill at Uckler and back was too much. I volunteered to drive to our golf classes because it meant I had easier afternoons and could potentially play golf at some awesome courses. One kid didn't play well at this course and afterwards went into the pro shop and ordered a new set of clubs to be delivered to his dorm room on campus. This is both rich kid syndrome but also smart kid move. These Turkish kids would spend a few grand at the Apple store whenever we were near. They'd get phones, iPods, iPads, laptops, etc. I think one kid spent near $20,000, but he said in Turkey they sell for 3 to 5 times as much. So he could sell a laptop for 2 to 3 times what he paid. Many of the students had never done laundry before, so that was always a fun part for us staff members. One student was worried the blue detergent would ruin her white clothes. Many students would use a laundry service because they didn't want to do it themselves, so they'd pay a ton more to have somebody else wash and fold it all. One student bought a TV and Xbox 360 to have in his dorm room for 4 weeks. He donated it to us at the end instead of selling it or taking it home. It sat in storage for a year until the next summer when we took it out and set it up in our office. One international student bought 3 suitcases at a store in anticipation of their shopping plans. They were full on departure day point. If you got locked out of your room it was like a $2 charge. We wanted to teach them some responsibility and a monetary fine was a good incentive. One kid gave us $200 on day 1 when he got locked out because it's gonna happen again. One student gave us a $10,000 Rolex as collateral for ping pong equipment. We took it for a day thinking it would be fair since it had to be fake. Nope. It was real. Many more. Went to a then smallish private school for 2 years that has now become fairly infamous in the city. They were in the process of trying to become a major player in well-known private school market of the southeast. Lost of doctors and lawyers kids and Jewish as the rest of the local private school were Christian affiliated in some way. Half the school was gone every Jewish holiday. I had come from normal middle-class public school upbringings. It was sold to my parents as a more individualized education. Public school was eating me alive and doing me no good. People went on to great things. Andrew Van Weingarten of MGMT was in the lower school. ABC fairytale actress Jennifer Goodwin was in my art class. In my grade was this one girl. Blonde, parents were loaded. She had decided school sucked and wasn't going to go. The school was threatening to let her go. Lol, wish fulfilled. Anyways, her dad wasn't having it. No stain on their family, no sorry. He buys her a Mercedes to drive to school. It wasn't old, but not model year. Very nice car. Basically, I'm giving you a nice car, get your butt to school. Well, she managed to royally damage the car in the school parking lot. Not a witness can't tell you what really happened. Fuse days, brand new model year Mercedes. What does Blondie school sucks do? Totally and royally fuck off school and try to convince others to ditch with her in her new car because she's lonely being alone. The other girls didn't bite. It was my last year there for other reasons. Another huge long story, but I can assume she didn't come back. Wondered what went down. Maybe boarding school. She needed it. My career path has took me through many tech startups. Most successful ones in my experience are started by regular working class people who know how to work with other working class people, treat them correctly, follow an ethical path, work smart, etc. But a few are started or employ in high up roles rich douchebags. They are the worst people to work with, my god. They live in a bubble. They have no idea how stupid they are, and their parents have raised them to think they are better than you and be assholes to what they think are their subordinates. Here is 2 classics. Had a rich spoiled douche in our top sales roles. Couldn't sell a faking thing. Engineers on sales. Calls sold more than this guy ever did. He was a bumbling idiot who lost important data and never used any of the process he said we were supposed to have. He would have loud calls about selling his boat, get pissy about not making enough money, and ask for very productive devs to be canned so he could make more, and then would turn about and have a loud call trying to book an expensive spa vacation. I had a manager tell me I had white male privilege. I was the first person in my family to graduate high school, grew with no money. I worked every shit job you could think of, and even worked 2 years full time at terrible jobs to save for college, which I then starved though. My dad didn't even have running water until he was a teenager. She on the other hand had a father who was a C-level executive at a major bank, sent her to a private school, paid for undergrad and postgrad in a pretty and a nice living situation, and then bought her a house. But I had privilege. What the fuck? My room at my freshman year at college had the trifecta of being rich, being a preacher's daughter, and being black. I'm absolutely not racist, but her being black is important, because down here in the deep south, that combination creates a special kind of bougie. She thought she was better than me because she was rich, and obviously rich black people work much harder and are smarter and have more skills than white people. And she thought she was better than other black kids because was educated. Keep in mind we were all college freshmen, so really she just meant she was used to a higher standard of living than the rest of us poor trash, black or white. The day we moved into the dorm she and her mother spent hours decorating our 10x15 room. She brought her own bed, dresser, desk, lamps, ottomans, etc. point and pitch to fit when she was told most of it wouldn't fit in the room and she had to send it home. That first night our floor had a big get together / meeting with the Raz, and my roommate asked Ara what days the maids came. When she was told there were no maids she was genuinely confused about who was supposed to clean her room. She tried to stage a coup and get all the other girls on our floor to complain and protest until the dorm hired maids for us. When that didn't work she tried to get us all to pitch in and pay for a maid ourselves. Obviously that didn't work out either. In stereotypical preacher's daughter fashion she proceeded to get blind drunk every single weekend and was taken to the ER twice in 6 weeks. What finally broke her was the alarm clock issue. She would literally never get up in the morning and turn off her alarm clock. She missed her morning class every single day because she slept through her alarm. It wasn't usually a big deal. It was just annoying to have to listen to her alarm constantly beeping while I was getting ready in the morning. But one day I'd had enough. When her alarm went off I got up, shook her awake, and told her alarm was buzzing and I was turning it off. I got ready for class and left. When I got out of class I had an angry text message telling me I had no right to be on her side of the room going through her stuff, and complained that she had missed her class because of me. I reminded her that I had woken her up and explained what I was doing, and she yelled at me for not waking her up the right way / the way my mama does it. When I got back to the dorm she was angrily packing up her stuff while Ara supervised. Neither of them said a word to me, and I thought I might be in trouble, but they just left. The next day I found out she was actually getting kicked out of the dorm for all the drinking, and that she was flunking out of school too. I never got another roommate and had the whole room to myself for the rest of the year. I wouldn't call this rich kid syndrome Parisian, but more a product of a spoiled / well-off upbringing. My boyfriend will swear up and down that store brand foods just taste different, and not in a good way. Even the stuff that couldn't possibly be different, like canned veggies that have no additional ingredients or additives. He will swear to you straight in the face that he can tell the difference. Thing is, I cook with store brand all the time, and I'll lie and say it's name brand and he can never tell. But if he knows something is store brand before eating it, it's like in his brain, it tastes off. Or if I tell him after the fact it was store brand, he will say, oh yeah, I thought I could taste something weird. Irks me to no end how snobby this attitude is. I've finally convinced him to start buying off-brand medication after showing him an article that said medications are regulated by the FDA and cannot legally deviate from the active ingredients of the corresponding name brand. Now I'm working on convincing him to start buying foods that are government regulated, salt, flour, corn, etc., and therefore have no difference. I feel like he thinks store brand foods are made with crops grown in the shittiest parts of the country or something. Like they're super inferior. I've tried telling him the crops for name brand and crops for store brand literally come from the same fields, and that there are lots of parent companies that own both name brand and store brand manufacturing plants. And half the time they products come out of the same damn factory, but he won't listen. Just says that whenever his mom bought off-brand stuff as a kid he could tell the difference. No, I think it's just that he associated those times with the times when his mom struggled a little to make ends meet, and that makes the food taste different in his mind because there's bad memories connected to it. In a class in college, a group was giving a presentation about some smart home tech or something similar and how it needs to be more widely adopted. To show how not widespread it was, one of the girls presenting says something like, only one of my family's 5 houses has this technology. You hear some scoffs and everyone is just kind of looking around with the same expression of disbelief and wondering, did she really just say that? You can tell she has no idea that people are acting to what she said. Next group goes, and one of the guys is talking and says, in one of my family's houses, also our only house, and the whole room loses it. Even the professor can't help but crack a smile. But the girl still had no idea what was going on. Another thing which was much lesser, but just showed me again how carefree rich people are with amounts of money I have to worry about. I was hanging out at a tailgate before a football game with the family of one of my friends who is well off. It was a huge game, so it was sold out, and tickets were going for huge amounts. The family didn't have tickets and just planned to buy some from scalpers before the game. They already got a pair for the mother and father, but needed another pair for the girl and someone else. I don't remember if it was a sibling or a friend. So the girl wanders off to try and find some tickets. She comes back a while later with 2 tickets and tells her dad she got them for $800. I was shocked she was so carefree about that amount. What was worse was her father responding, $800 each. Not a bad deal. I was amazed they cost $800 together, while he thought it was a good deal, if that's how much they were individually. That was definitely one of those so this is how the 1% lives types of moments. The family was amazing though and absolutely forced all this really nice and expensive alcohol and food on us that we felt really bad taking. It's just that's when I realized them spending $1,000 is probably like me spending $10. TBH, it sounds weird to say at this point, but I think I was the worst case of rich kid syndrome that I have ever seen. I've gotten way better as I've gotten older, to the point where the only reason I haven't moved out on my own is because my job doesn't pay enough. But I used to very much me and Nana. I want this Nana equals grandma. Still call her that because that's what I've always called her, and she would buy it for me, whatever it was. I would always ask to buy the brand new games, even if I didn't particularly want to play them, I still wanted them. I think at one point I had about 50 to 60 I played games. I was a little sheet. Mind you, an important thing to note is, my family isn't rich. At the time I didn't know my grandma couldn't really afford to pay for all the stuff she did, but she did it because she loved me. I feel. But I wouldn't do my laundry, take my garbage out, wash my dishes, or make my own food outside of a sandwich here or there. Making my bed was a non-issue because I sleep on a couch. I just kinda prefer them to beds. And in fairness and all appreciation to my grandma, I was going through some rough shit for a while there that might have been affecting how I behaved. But then around the time I was 16 to 17, 21 now, something just kinda like clicked. And I stopped being like that and kinda turned everything around. It wasn't until this past year that I really felt like, yeah, I'm a fully functioning adult now. So I guess I was less of a rich kid and more of a spoiled upper middle class kid, probably never gonna get caught up on all those games though. Also, love you Nana. Thanks for all the kindness and support over the years. Apologize for any formatting issues on mobile. I went to an expensive all-girls prep school. I and most of my friends were scholarship students, but we had one crazy rich friend, Amy. We didn't really like Amy all that much, but she didn't exactly have anyone else to hang out with. She was honestly kind of crazy and the other rich girls didn't like her because she was new money. Her dad was an attorney who won a huge lawsuit against a railroad company in the 80s. Anyway, Amy would show off her wealth in lots of bizarre and outlandish ways, such as she had 2 cars. She had her Lexus SUV that she drove around as her daily car and a Land Rover that she used for special occasions or if it was raining. The Lexus also has the back hatch converted into a literal mobile bar with champagne flutes and wine glasses, ice buckets, multiple kinds of spirits, etc. She somehow never got caught doing this. Her dad bought a new multi-million-dollar house. She and her sister complained that the yard wasn't big enough for their dogs. So his solution was to buy the multi-million-dollar house next door and demolish it so it could just be one big dog yard. They basically lived on a compound at that point. You had to drive a mile or so just to get to the front door. Her boyfriend's family was similarly wealthy and he was a few years older and in a college a few hours away. She wanted to go visit him one Friday after school, but her dad refused to let her drive or take the family driver that far because it was storming. She threw a huge fit until her dad finally caved and let her take the family plane and pilot. In a faking storm, she ended up coming back early because her boyfriend was studying and she wasn't having fun. The same boyfriend pissed her off somehow once and she wasn't speaking to him. In the middle of class, she gets called to the office to be checked out for the day. Turns out her boyfriend ditched all his classes, drove down to our city, pretended to be her cousin to check her out, and flew her on his family's jet to the Virgin Islands for a few days, causing her to miss school. That was his form of apologizing. Another time, she was out of school for several weeks to do outpatient rehab. She was bored with having no one to hang out with, so she paid a guy to call in a fake bomb threat to our school so we could get out for the day and hang out with her. You know Amy from Gone Girl? This Amy was very similar. She was scary, intelligent and manipulative and cruel, but super charming when she wanted to be. I could totally see her getting away with faking her own murder. I knew a very wealthy Middle Easterner. The amount of rich kid things he did was unreal. This was in college. Before I even knew this dude, everyone knew about the person who parked their Mercedes G63 AMG in the loading zone outside the business school every day. Literally, every day. And every day, he got a ticket. Everyone knew about this dude because he was getting a parking ticket literally every day and just didn't care. Fast forward to when I know him. He has totaled the G63 and was being punished by his father. His punishment was having his G63 130k plus replaced with an E550 65k and losing his monthly allowance. His faking allowance was $5,000 a month. Now it was $2,000 a month. He was just waiting until he graduated when his dad would give him his graduation present. He was getting a Mercedes GT AMG 130k and a speedboat. His dad bought his brother a small yacht for his graduation the year before. He also tried to outsource all his homework to a group in Boston who had gotten him a 3.8 at ASU for around $10,000 a year. Didn't work when he transferred to our school. Professor could tell whoever wrote it wasn't in the class. Along with that, he was literally always faked up on Xanax when he managed to show up to class. He would stumble in, sit down in the back of class, and obviously had no idea what was going on. Literally he was delirious half of the time. Once he realized that he needed someone that was actually in the classes to do his essays, he started offering me hundreds of dollars to write them. He also almost got kicked out of the school because, living on campus, he decided to hotbox his whole dorm. When the rat inevitably smelled the smell of a whole room hotbox, they called security, and he was in pretty serious trouble. His solution? Ignore all of the notices about upcoming meetings with the school administration and police. He just wouldn't show up and managed to keep this going for weeks. Eventually it got too serious and he had to have his dad fly in, talk to a very high up member of the administration, and make a very generous donation to the school. His problem seemed to go away after that. Smoking with him was cool though. In the dispensary by us, they used to sell those high quality joints dipped in hash oil rolled in keef. He would spend $110 every single night on 8 of those joints and would basically proceed to smoke non-stop for the rest of the night and just plow through the joints. He would try to bribe me hundreds of dollars to just do stupid shit. Run into the ocean at night with all my clothes on and swim 200 yards out and back for $300. I wouldn't do it because it was almost like he got off on negotiating and trying to convince me to do these genuinely pointless acts. They could be as simple as walk to the top of that tall hill over there. He was nice enough though. Once offered to fly me out to his mansion complex in his home country or his extremely high-end apartment in London, my choice, and demanded that I bring no money. He insisted on paying for everything. I didn't take him up on it because he ended up getting kicked out of school at the end of the year. I'm sure there are more things that I can't remember. This guy was unreal. I have so many stories for some reason, all from different random encounters. One kid living on his own for the first time on a study abroad program asked me if it was cheaper to buy groceries or just eat out all the time. He was an economics major. One guy from a family of millionaires felt very invested in convincing me he wasn't that privileged, even though I didn't call him out at all. He claimed he was like any other college student, since my mom pays for my car, tuition, and apartment and gives me $150 a week for my food budget, and I make $10/HR working at the family business, but after I buy weed each week I'm totally broke. My favorite is an example of a rich kid all grown up. An elderly millionaire was paying us to publish his vanity autobiography, even though he had inherited his money and accomplished little in life on his own. We had to meet with him at his house because he refused to come into the office. We'll cut him some slack in this part as his health wasn't the best, and I was warned to bring food and water to the meeting as he had a reputation for not feeding his guests. We get there, and he has a manservant he can summon with a buzzer who gives him an amazing looking breakfast, which he eats in front of us during the meeting. I'm not expecting any food as I have been warned, but he didn't even offer us any coffee, tea, or tap water. Then he drags the meeting on for 5 hours, when it was only supposed to be 2, and I've run out of food and water, and I'm dying to leave. He starts yelling at my boss over an issue related to the book, and screamed, "Why can't you just let me have my way? This meeting has been going on for 5 hours, and I didn't even get any breakfast." Actually dude, you're the only one here who got a proper breakfast, and your obstinacy is the only reason why the meeting took so long. My boyfriend from when we were 17. He is 34 now and living in a condo his parents paid for, and had never had a job in his life other than 2 days at a Wendy's when he was 17 that our mutual friend got him, and he quit because it sucked. No shit, it faking sucked. Deal with it like the rest of us did, and he didn't need it because his dad paid for a fancy car and gave him a CC. His parents paid for him to go to liberal arts school and then grad school, psychology or something, and now he refuses to do anything, and he doesn't have to because they just give him a credit card to buy what he wants and occasionally go out with the only person that can stand him at this point. It's actually kind of sad. He was a very bright, caring, and attractive young man, but now from what I've seen on FB and stuff, he's falling apart because when you're 34 and you've never had to do anything for yourself and have no sense of pride or independence, it's kind of a depressing realization and takes a toll on you, especially when your former friends are all advancing in their careers, getting married, buying houses, having babies, adulting. Not sure what you do at this point. How do you get a job with 34 years of no work experience? I haven't hung out with him in ages because his constant woo is me without being willing to do anything to change his situation really started to get to me. But from what I can tell, his parents have pretty much ruined his life. I used to be friends with this chick whose parents weren't super rich but could afford to pay all of her bills, bought her car, took her on expensive trips, and gave her expensive gifts, that kind of stuff. Since her parents were paying all of her bills and she worked full time, her income was basically just expendable. I made a little bit more money than she did, and I was always struggling to pay everything because my parents didn't cover everything I did, and the cost of living is high here. She would suggest that our entire friend group go out for dinner, or go do some activity, or go somewhere, and was always really confused when people told her they couldn't afford it because we make the same amount. She always had to one-up everyone too. If you bought something, she had to buy a better one. She spent hundreds of dollars on materials every time she wanted to start a business making thing. She would buy everyone stuff all the time, basically trying to buy their friendship, because it happened every time she was a complete beach to someone. She was always making these catty comments about how much better her things were than everyone else's. She got jealous that she lived in an apartment and other friends we knew were going to rent a house, so she bought a house. It was ridiculous. Actually joined Reddit just to answer this. My mom worked for AAFES, so I was around a lot of military brats. Went to high school in Germany and there was a lower classman named Andy. Both of his parents were ranked colonel. He was the richest guy I knew in school, but not like insanely rich. We were in the same club, and he was pretty normal if a bit pervy, but we were all kinda like that. He invited us to his house for his birthday. We get there, and his parents aren't home. We ask him, and he says that they were busy. He shows us around his house and we get to his room. Y'all, this guy had so much hentai around his room. It was out in the open. Most of it was hardcore visual novel games. The craziest thing was that he admitted his parents bought it all for him. I guess they were never home, and they felt bad, so they just bought him whatever he wanted. And what he wanted was lots of porn. He once brought his laptop on a school bus trip and showed some of the guys a tentacle porn game. Had no shame in showing it. I have quite a few stories that showed how all that porn really messed up his ability to understand normal social settings. His perviness became less funny and more creepy after see his room. Funny thing is my mom was also ranked colonel. I just didn't know it for a long time. Technically I had rich kid syndrome for a while because I thought it was normal to travel to different countries while growing up. When she retired and we moved to the States, I made some friends and was so shocked there were people who had never left their state, much less the country. This is quite late to be adding to this thread, but I figured it would be a decent place to let out some feelings I have. Recently, friend of almost 7 to 8 years from elementary has started becoming really entitled. Bear in mind my friends and I are not rich at all. At best some of us are solidly middle class at a school where kids who do manage to get into T20 schools only go if they get 80% to 100% aid. So, my friend is a really high achieving intellectual, crazy smart, recently got accepted through a likely letter into Yale as a part of their computer engineering program. So no slouch as he has attended a well-known summer research program and has his paper being published. His father works long hours and his mother recently started working too to support and have stuff to do since he is the youngest and is considered independent. However, my friend complains about how stupid his parents are for ruining his financial aid chances for upcoming years due to increased income, and how his mom doesn't take care of him for shit anymore, basically becoming very unappreciative of his parents' contribution to his success. They engaged him in practically everything he is good at, math competitions, computer science, his music lessons, basically set him up to become very successful, and he has so far. Since being able to afford college is a common topic of discussion, he openly jokes and belittles his parents about their reluctance to pay for college at full price. As many kids and young adults from middle class backgrounds know, we have some of the most trouble paying for a college education given our families make too much for aid, but not nearly enough to pay up, stating he doesn't need them. He'll do things himself, etc. For example, he got a stipend for research, spent it on a much needed new phone, but when his parents approach him about his behavior he physically fights them and is quick to talk about how his success is his own. He even skipped out on going to lunch on the weekend with another friend and I, just because our parents were taking us. Yes, we are HS seniors, but it's not childish, not mention his disdain for affirmative action and minority status. Honestly, he is just ticking off all the boxes of offensive nerd who has gotten success and is just so hungry for more. I'm not sure others in our friend circle really notice this change in behavior from chill nerd to annoying dick. Our group is 90% minorities, Asian. He and another friend are white, but since I'm one of his longtime friends, looking back I can really see how his ambition and worldviews are really disturbing me now. I guess my reason for posting here so late and about him is not about rich kids, but to ask advice about what to do about the situation. He's a good person, but these actions of his are sticking out like sore thumbs. Sorry for ranting, I hope this is coherent, but honestly I'm just worried. TLDR middle class friend in a middle class / poor friend group has recently become an as acting all high and mighty because of his intellectual success, and it is off-putting. Need advice. I met this guy who was in his early 20s at the time, at this small anime convention in Connecticut. Really small, I might add, only like 200 people at most maybe. He seemed nice, and I talked to him all weekend and thought his cosplay looked really cool. He was going as Big Boss from MGS3, and it came out really well. We talked about how expensive it was to make cosplays or buy them. Anyways, I added this guy in Facebook, and we didn't talk for a year, and then all of a sudden he messaged me asking if I was going to Anime Boston for all 3 days. This convention is big and a little pricey, and going all 3 days was kind of not in my budget, because I'm a broke 18-year-old who doesn't have access to money, and at the time I couldn't find a job, so I was living on the cheaper side. I told him no and the reason why I couldn't go, and he said, oh, just ask your dad for money or something. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to ask my father for money, even if he did have it. I'm not like that. So I just said I can't, because we're not in the best financial situation right now. I'm still friends with the guy, and he decides to invite me over to his house, because it's his birthday and he wanted people over. So I'm like, yeah sure. I go to his house and this place is fucking huge. It's got 2 kitchens, and what seems like 3 living rooms, and he had the upstairs to himself by the looks of it. Oh, and I'm not even done describing the house. One of the bathrooms, probably like 5 of them, was really fucking nice. It had a hot tub and a sauna. This sheet was better than the overpriced gym I would go to. Anyways, the house is nice and room is full of electronics, like high-end shit. Definitely didn't buy any of it. He had this shitty gaming PC he said he spent a lot on. I can't remember the exact amount, but it was in the thousands, and a PS4 which at the time was brand new, and he was bragging about how his parents bought it for his birthday, and how he's been playing it non-stop, and here I'm still playing on a first gen Xbox 360. That sounds like it's slowly dying. Eventually I see the most expensive room of the night, his cosplay closet. There was probably $10,000 worth of cosplay in there, and plenty of airsoft guns and shit, and I asked him if he made any of it, and he said no, I just bought it off of eBay and Amazon. I asked if that was just the guns, and he said no, it was everything. So I decided to ask what he did for work. He said he didn't work. He sat on his ass all day playing PS4 while his parents provided for him. He then added on how he was autistic and he couldn't get work because of it. Should also add I have autism and have found employment. Really not that hard for me, but I don't know, it may vary. I'm not an expert on it. I only have it. So I figured alright, well I do buy stuff for my cosplay every once and a while and it's not that bad I guess. I was trying to hold back some jealousy, most likely since I did a lot of thrift store hunting for stuff I was looking for, and my cosplay would never really come out that great. So eventually I don't at the time really care about anything that happened and continued to be friends with him. I visited his house a couple of times after, and then eventually we stopped hanging out. Skip to a year ago. His parents finally kicked him out. Would have never have guessed that. And he's currently living in this nice apartment and bitching about how he has to live in an apartment on Facebook. He's also forced to cut back on his spending and is only given like $1,400 a week or something like that. Don't even know what the parents do, but they hand him money like it's peanuts or something. He's messaging me on Facebook trying to sell me some cosplay sheet with extremely high prices. Usually you're supposed to lower the price if the product is used. He eventually guilted me into buying this shitty mask he bought for a cosplay for around $200. I feel so stupid for buying it, and I still feel stupid. I bought the mask, and it was supposed to light up and everything, which I thought, well, I can use this for something. It didn't work, so I asked him why it wasn't working. He said he didn't know. I told him I don't want it, and asked him for my money back, and he threw out the "we'll settle this in court" card. I told him to go fuck himself and went home. He tried to patch things up, but at the same time, was trying to get me to buy more shit, and I told him to fuck off. I don't know if this is rich kid syndrome or just overall being a faking asshole. Either way, I just needed to talk about it. Sorry if that ending wasn't satisfying, but it really didn't end in any explosive way. TLDR, below, at my university, private, Christian, in the South, there's a tradition where the upperclassmen pass down a symbol of the university to the freshmen. The freshmen are then to protect this symbol on open ground 24 hours a day for the next week, until a ceremony to reinstall the symbol. Meanwhile, the upperclassmen would try to steal it back to prove whether or not we were up to the challenge or some such bullshit. Anyway, we, as freshmen, set up where we were supposed to. We barricaded the symbol. We had watchers set so that there were always plenty of freshmen available to block and defend. We also happened to be set up on an open spot which was right next to a parking lot. On the final night we were defending, the upperclassmen got reckless and started driving through the lot, throwing things, being rowdy, trying to draw us out. It kinda worked. One kid jumped out in front of a BMW SUV that was pretty obviously brand new. The driver swerved so as not to kill the guy, and in the process, jumped a curb and slammed into a tree. Messed his car up bad. Front left tire was no longer properly attached, fender smashed, airbags deployed. The BMW backed up and took off, dragging that tire sideways. The cops came, took statements, searched for the vehicle, offered reward money to find the driver, looked at off-site apartments to see if it was parked nearby. No luck. 8 months later, at the end of freshman year, I'm hanging out with a friend at a stranger's house, friend of my friend. We are shooting the shit, taking about the year, and one of us brings up this incident. One of the guys there starts laughing hysterically, along with his buddy. Turns out, it was his BMW. When I asked how nobody ever found out, he told me that he took it to a friend's house off campus and parked in their backyard. He called his dad, explained, and his dad sent an identical vehicle down from their hometown on an enclosed trailer. Under the cover of night, they, a worker, really, unloaded the new BMW, loaded the wrecked one, swapped license plates, and sent the wreck to a junkyard. TLDR, rich kid wrecks an expensive new car while driving dangerously. Cops search for the vehicle, but his daddy sent an identical one to replace it, swapped license plates, and scrapped the original. 2 stories of varying degrees, both freshman year college. Point story 1. I went to, recently graduated, from a college in a city where housing is the most expensive on the planet. For my freshman year, way more students decided to attend the school than they had anticipated. We were told that we were living in triples, which we all thought meant a room that accommodates 3 people, but what we found out when we got there was that all the triple rooms were just doubles with an extra bed and drawer thrown in. As you can imagine, come move-in day, most people were not too happy about that. Most of us made do, but rich kid was having none of that. He took one look and immediately called his parents, and literally the very next day he was the owner, not rentee, but owner of a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment across from school, and by across I mean it's on the other side of the very same street as our school. Just looked on Zillow and the apartment/units in that block/street range from $1 to $3 mil. Average rent for a 3-bedroom apartment is $5,000 to $5,800. I know this because I ended up in the same group as rich kid, and pretty much whenever anything was at his house, Super Bowl, reg party, birthdays, all the alcohol and food he would provide, and also ended up being friends with his would-be roommate. And that's when he told me, yeah, rich kid only stayed one night / the first night of move-in, and then by the next day he was out. Point story 2. Not as long, but friend was mine was in the laundry room doing laundry and she accidentally got her towel super soapy. I think she just wanted a rinse, but she must have put detergent in or something, I don't know. She asked me what to do, and I told her just rinse the towel out in the sink, since all the other machines were in use and she didn't know how to do that. Found out she grew up with maids her entire childhood in the Philippines, and in the States her parents have always done her laundry for her. But yeah, that was more of a realization of the wealth difference in the world, as both her parents are accountants, and where she lives right now in the States she is very much just middle class. Went to a pretty well-off high school, lots of kids with rich parents basically that mingled with us middle class kids. Out of all the rich kids there was one kid who stood out, or at least tried to show off more than the others. He was adopted, and I have this theory that his parents adopted him because they had so much money to waste but no one to spend it on. I honestly don't think they could have kids of their own, because this guy was their only one. Anyway, he got all the normal rich kid stuff, nice car, new clothes, and allowed to have parties at his parents' big house at the ocean front. They didn't care if teenagers were over getting faked up and breaking stuff. One night this rich kid was taking a bunch of Xanax and drinking whiskey when he decided to flex on all of us. He had a new 72-inch TV in his gaming room that everyone was marveling at. At the time I had never seen a TV that big, and flat screens were still brand new and very expensive. Everyone is so impressed / amazed his parents bought him such a large TV, but he assured us all they would buy him another. Party guests, why would they buy you another TV this size? Rich kid, because I'm going to shoot this one. He goes to his closet, pulls out a shotgun, and then shoots the TV from his couch in front of it. Surprisingly no one really freaked out, and things continued on as normal. That night I learned that Xanax is a hell of a drug that makes people not give a fuck about anything, especially people with a lot of money. A guy I know who is in debt up to his eyeballs, but is convinced he is rich, raises his kids like they are. Exclusive schools. First car was a new Range Rover, all that sheet points. So one day the mom gets a call from a cop telling her to come to an address and leave her phone in the car. When she gets there, it's really cryptic, but it's also like 2 AM and involves her teenage daughter, so she does it. She pulls up to a huge house and finds out that her daughter and some friends were sheeted drunk and hotboxing a car in the driveway. Keep in mind, this is Texas, and weed is not only illegal, but seriously frowned upon. The adults in the room are parents, an attorney, and a cop from a small affluent suburb about 20 minutes away. Important here, it wasn't the cops for the city that they actually live in. During the conversation they ask about criminal charges, and the cop literally says that it's his job to look out for people like you. Then offers the parents the chance to take a trash bag out to the car and get personal belongings before he conducts a search. They trash booze, weed, and pills in the car. The pills would be a felony here, and then he goes and does his search and finds nothing illegal. Point where these kids in a regular neighborhood, they would be facing at least 2 misdemeanors and a felony for the pills. But since they are rich, they have their own personal cop who can make stuff like this go away. Point also worth mentioning that the dad in this situation has hit multiple cars while drunk with kids in the car and just left. His attorney came by, threw money at the situation, including buying surveillance footage, and it all went away. Fleeing the scene of an accident and DUI with kids in the car are both felonies in Texas. I have one from college. My roommate the summer of my senior year was a complete blind match. I lived off campus all year and needed to stay in a dorm to take some required summer courses. I got into the dorm room second and saw all these shoes and dress pants lined up. Thousands of dollars of shoes, fancy dress shirts that were all dry cleaned, etc. My side was all t-shirts from punk shows, old ragged shorts and flip-flops. He was an engineering student whose family was from Central America, but was insanely wealthy. He had a personal shopper at the fancy department store in town, and would go once a week to just get new stuff for the weekend to wear. He would just pick up whatever she pulled for him. I saw him drop $10K for 4 suits, because he couldn't choose which he liked the best. He wore dress shirts and dress pants to class every day at a public university. He dressed better than all of his professors, let alone his art major roommate who was lucky if he could find a shirt that wasn't stained with beer or paint to wear to class. Great guy. We had a lot of fun hanging out, but we were certainly the odd couple. Did I mention he used to take his laptop to class in a briefcase? When he was done for the semester he threw all the clothes out in the dumpster behind the dorm. He also threw out everything he didn't want to take home with him from the dorm, so all of his bedding, plates, lights, utensils etc. He took home his laptop and his CDs, and the clothes he had on when he went to the airport. Oddly he lives in the same area as me now, and we've never connected again. Not exactly a rich kid, but still gonna be a long one, and depressing point. I was studying abroad for college, and had this guy who was from the same country as me studying at the same school, so we became best friends pretty quickly. Neither of us had much money. There were times we spent a whole day without being able to eat anything, while waiting for our student loans to come from the government. His mother had inherited a mansion in one of the best locations in our country, but they weren't able to sell it due to it being so fucking expensive. They were just waiting for the right buyer to come up. As soon as they sold, his mom bought a house in our origin country to live, thank God. Now we are talking about $30,000 minus $50 left just to him living in an ex-communist country. He could have easily bought 5 different businesses, and with little management live the rest of his life swimming in cash. Instead, he immediately left the dorm, and rented an extremely expensive apartment in a gated community in the country we were studying. This apartment was so over the top, that when I visited him, I have seen 4 different celebrities of this country coming in and out from the buildings. His whole lifestyle changed with going out for expensive dinners, when we would consider 2 cups of noodles in our dorm room a good dinner, having different prostitutes 2 to 3 times a week and a shit ton of alcohol. I begged him to invest this money into something, so he wouldn't have to live like he used to again, but he answered with, why have this money if I'm not gonna have fun with it? It's not like I'm gonna spend it all anytime soon. Of course, next year comes, and his account is dry. On top of that, he didn't even realize they had no money left, so all of his cards were full with him not being able to pay any of it. He had to come back to the dorm and just live the same way he used to, just a little bit better, since his mom was able to support him, now that she didn't have to pay rent. After this, he was extremely depressed for a couple of months, didn't enjoy anything that he did. He wasn't the same guy that would laugh all night while playing games on an empty stomach. Dropped school and just left. Tried to reconnect with him a couple times over the internet, but has no way to do it, since he doesn't enter any of his social media accounts anymore. I still wonder what happened to him. I worked at an extremely wealthy private Christian school. Mostly wealthy oil families. One of the other young attractive female teachers was hired by the family of the 16-year-old star quarterback to babysit him and his little sister, who I think was 11, on and off throughout the year. Yes, we all thought it was strange. All of a sudden the teacher resigned at a really odd time in the middle of the semester. Rumor had gotten out the teacher and 16-year-old quarterback had been having sex at each and every babysitting session over most of the year. It wasn't just rumor, the parents paid the school money to keep it quiet and to have the teacher removed by resignation. The parents basically paid the teacher and school hush money. No police called, no charges filed on the teacher, because they were concerned how it would look on their family and school. We even had a staff meeting where they basically told us, if we heard rumors, to make the talk stop immediately, because the family had made a large donation to the school and none of it was true. How did we know it was true? The boy bragged to most of the football team by showing pictures and a video. I lasted one more semester before I left myself because the principal wanted me to change a grade for a student who made large contributions to the school. The student was lazy and did nothing. I refused and was pretty much harassed until I resigned by the principal and family. This wasn't uncommon for this school. TLDR. Family paid Christian school hush money to have the school not report a female teacher they hired to babysit who was having sex with their 16-year-old son. At a rich kid's party, had to do a beer run. Biggest fanciest house high on a hill. Windy road down to Safeway. So the rich kid says let's go. 8. We head outside to his car. His car is blocked. He goes and gets the keys to the car blocking his a brand new Subaru WRX. We are hammered. Rich kid starts driving fast and furious down the twisting road. Some sections have guardrails and some don't. I'm like, dude, we are brothers. You have nothing to prove. Chill and slow down. He said, YOLO, lol. I'm like, fuck me, I'm going to die. Anyways, we get to Safeway and fill up a cart with beer and tequila. I get ready to pay, and he is like, nah, I got this. Pulls out daddy's credit card and says thanks dad and turns to me and winks. Then we get back in the car to head back up. Dude is faking banking on this 2-lane road. There are guardrails in some sections and some don't have them. Anyways, he eventually slides into 2 oncoming lane and slams into a guardrail. The whole driver's side is smashed. Drive it back. It's quiet as shit up there. We walk in, and the other dude was like, you crashed my car. We were outside, and we heard it. The rich kid was like, don't worry, my dad will pay for it, or buy you a new one. The other kid was rich too, and he said cool, shrugged his shoulders, and said let's take some shots. Party resumes like nothing happened, and I'm like, this must be a different planet, because in my world my dad would have beat my ass. I have multiple stories as I have worked for experiential outdoor education companies whose clientele are the elite of the elite. Some trips costing 50k for 1 month excursion. Here are some highlights while living in a desert camp in the Middle East, outside of Dubai and Sharjah. A 10-year-old girl decided that the camp didn't have enough chicken. Parisian so used her satellite phone, that's right, you read that correctly, to call in an airlift from her father back in the city. I awoke to a helicopter touching down outside of our desert camp, with her bodyguards and servants ushering her into the helicopter. Because we didn't feed her what she wanted. Same scenario, but on a small island outside of Hong Kong. 14-year-old kid was mad we weren't providing cup of noodles due to the amount of gas it would use to boil water multiple times a day while making group meals. Parents send a private helicopter to land a backpack full of extra gas canisters and a separate backpack full of cup of noodles. Son of the owner of one of the world's largest oil company refused to set up his own gear and or cook food, offered me money. When I told him no, he threw his entire bag off a cliff into a ravine. His handler basically made him hike/abseil down, retrieve the bag, and then sleep in a broken tent. He paid another kid $500 for his dinner because he refused to cook food for himself. This was while working in the Middle East. Student was driven to a camp in her birthday present. She was 11. It was a pink custom McLaughlin to drive her to her friend's house and school. This was while working in the Middle East. Student in the backcountry of Laos brought an extra bag into a village for service-oriented work, building a school. Student comments on the kids having sweet hairdos and hair dye. I explained to him that's spotting due to malnutrition. Student continues to put extra food on plate and not finish meals, throwing food away in front of literally starving children. One day leaves the extra random backpack in the kitchen. I open it. It is full of Oreos leaves, which the student is eating after each meal every day, enough for 2 weeks. So I invited all the local kids in and gave them all away. Student comes back and has a meltdown because he didn't have enough Oreos to supplement his own glutinous rage over the next 2 weeks. This felt so good. I went to a fairly affluent school despite being raised by a mother in a lower middle class family. I'm talking the school I went to was ranked #5 snottiest school by David Letterman at the time. The incident in question occurred when I was a freshman. I had just gotten my own vehicle and DL, but I also had a job already and had been saving up to pay for my car. So this kid, we will just call him Fathead, begged his dad, who owned a car dealership, to buy him a car. His father, not wanting to just give him whatever, he decided he would buy a new Plymouth Prowler for himself. The Roadster, as you may remember, was an odd car to be sure. The father was so overweight he didn't comfortably fit in the car and gave it to his son as a first car. It was clear after a few days that the son had no reason to be driving such a fancy car, nor did he like the thing. So daddy buys him a brand new H3 Hummer at his request, outfitted with everything you could imagine. Really, I was surprised there was not a new spot on the damn thing, as it was at the time one of the most over-the-top SUVs you could buy. The kid bragged on it enough to make the administration sick enough to tell him to shut up about it. It actually made it to the PTA notes. So Fathead decides to be an idiot, big surprise, and leaves the sunroof open during the school day and it rains real hard. This destroys the interior. No problem though. Daddy buys him a new one the very next day, with a few less options of course. But the list of ridiculous cars that kids at this school had goes on. There was a kid with a 69 PTO Judge, or 3000 GT, all kinds of muscle cars. I remember another time at graduation a kid was given a Porsche and it got keyed like a mofo because let's face it, the kid was a rich little cunt and deserved it. His sister got fake tigs at 17 and ended up being a Playboy model. That was the level of rich kid shit I had to put up with on a daily basis. Ironically enough, most of those kids are now either successful or drug addicts. There is now in between. Everyone else is dead of ODS or suicide. Kinda sad really. This one girl in high school was always wearing designer clothes, diamond and gold jewelry, and drove a Mercedes. Apparently her family had a tradition that she would get at least one new piece of diamond jewelry every year for both her birthday and Christmas. She got a diamond tennis bracelet for her birthday, but when Christmas came I overheard her bitching to her friends about what she got. Apparently they didn't get her any diamonds. Just a new iPhone, a new iPad, a raise in her already $4,000 a month allowance, and some love out in heels. She's adopted and was originally from Vietnam, although she hasn't been back since she was about a week old, and whenever anyone called her out on her spoiled rich kid crap she would be all like, I'm not spoiled. I'm even from a poor country. This bitch lived in a house where she had a maid, personal chef, a in-home theater, expensive clothes, expensive electronics, expensive jewelry, expensive cars, and literally anything she wanted if she asked for it. Despite that, she used to love to tell people all about what a poor country she came from and how because her biological parents just dropped her off somewhere and her birthday was estimated that she would never be 100% sure what day her birthday was. Like, shut the fuck up. There's only 2 days it could be and your parents celebrate on both days. She faking loved all the sympathy. She would get to the point where she'd act like she was holding back tears as she told the story, faking hated her. Worked at a fast food place while in college. Had a mid-teen girl working there who was only working there as her parents were well off and wanted to try to teach her some appreciation and lessons about working hard. She only worked a few hours a week, mostly as cashier, and was both slow and terrible at it. One day when it was busy we switched her with another faster cashier to get the line moving and handed her a broom. Now, this is the first and only time in my 28 years of living I've ever seen someone have literally no clue how to use a broom. I can understand being bad at sweeping, but this girl held it like it was poisonous at arm's length, sweeping towards her and between her feet, and on the forward stroke, swept the same mess between her feet forward and away from her. It's the only time I've seen someone sweep where instead of moving the stuff on the floor in one direction, they just spread it around more. When someone tried to show her how to work a broom in a sideways sweeping motion, where you lift the broom on the back swing so the dirt is all going one way instead of all over, she pitched a fit about how this is too hard and beneath her, and she walked out. She didn't last too long at that job. My best friend suffers from this. I've known him ever since 6th grade, and he was pretty alright for the most part. He lived in a moderate house in a moderate neighborhood with his mother. We would hang out at cross country and track practice and play video games after all the time, and do stupid kid stuff. He seemed like a normal kid. Though his dad lives across the country and, apparently, is in a high position on Wall Street and is a multimillionaire. I didn't really know about this until puberty hit him around sophomore year of high school, and he felt the need to show it off by buying a lot of gutsy clothes and having his dad buy him a BMW supercar. He became a completely different person. He even quit the cross country and track team to do debate and stopped playing video games because he thought they were childish. All of a sudden he became really preppy, and it annoyed the shit out of me. I tried to just accept the change, but it just wasn't the same. Senior year he basically became Andy from The Office and wouldn't shut up about Cornell. I mean, his dad did go to Cornell and even paid for him to take debate classes there over the summer, though it still got on my nerves sometimes. He was a smart kid, but not that smart, you know. He got a 1200 on the SAT and had a 3.4 GPA, which is alright but not genius level, like he was trying to portray. That year we were in the same English class, and every time he had to make a comment about something, he would literally say, I learned at my class over the summer at Cornell that. It was just annoying because, being his friend, I felt like I was just in his shadow. He became so entitled and didn't want to do anything he didn't want to do with our friends. He would just beach until he got his way, and if he didn't, he would just go home. He started to become a bad friend and excluded me from things, even his New Year's get together. Hell, he would still invite me to some stuff and then tell me that they were cancelled, but in reality, he just invited over some girls and didn't want me there around them. I was kind of happy when he got deferred and then denied by Cornell. I felt bad for him, but I figured it would put him in his place and he'd become a slightly better, more well-minded person. However, he just told everyone that he was going to go to school in Rome and then transfer to Cornell after a year there. We hung out before he went off to Rome, and I would still consider him one of my good friends, but I've lost a lot of my trust and respect for him. Hopefully, there is a cure for this syndrome. This one really isn't bad, just a culture shock and surprise for me, I guess, since I was not raised in money. My family was lower middle class to straight up poor for my childhood. Earlier this year I worked with a company that does the taking groups of kids hiking thing. This isn't the usual walk for an hour and then spend the next day in a nice campground type program. We're out for a full week on the trail, hiking hard terrain from sun up to near sundown. We do the extreme self-reliance and teamwork primitive camping while teaching actually survival skills thing. The guides are there to basically make sure no one dies or gets seriously hurt. With a group of 12 to 13 young teens, 11 to 13 years old, that can be a challenge, but it's amazing to see the transformation on around day 3 when they realize that they have to get over themselves and work together to get things done. Anyhow, on this trip we had a group of kids from a very rich private school from another state. Every single kid had brand new extremely high-end hiking gear, boots, bags, clothing, etc. More than none of the kids in my group were children of professional athletes. So, now that the story is set, there was this one girl that was just amazing. She was extremely privileged. But, I found out that she wasn't always. She had been in the foster care system for most of her life, going from home to home in increasingly bad situations, until her adoptive family took her in a couple years ago. She, quite literally, hit the lottery as her new family was loaded. Even so, she was still really thoughtful and caring for others, even though some of the others were dismissive of her. On the 4th night out, a strong storm came in. We weathered the storm just fine, but on my daily check-in with base camp I was told that there was a leak that had soaked a lot of the kids' personal belongings that was left behind. Word got out about it and this other kid was straight up panicking that his brand new iPad Pro might have been damaged. This girl I'm talking about came over, tried to comfort him, and said if it's broken, I'll buy you a new one when we get back. Like it was nothing to her. She offered to buy a $1,000 device to console someone who had, until then, shown no wish to even be her friend. Turns out the iPad was fine, after all. In fact, no real damage to anything, except a few wet sets of clothes. I hope she keeps that thoughtfulness and compassion through her life, and doesn't get caught up in the rat race of being a rich kid. It will carry her well. Does manage it. I lived with a guy whose parents had him after they were already filthy rich and retired. He told me once that it was irresponsible of my single income, lower middle class parents to withhold an allowance from their 5 kids. I just said some people can't afford to give their children an allowance, and he shut up about it. But that's not the worst case. Every year his family took a holiday trip to random places around the world. That particular year, the family decided to go to Egypt. He managed to find a million things to complain about, and, in the end, his mom offered to pay for him to take a friend to Cancun, while the rest of the family stuck to their Egypt plans. My husband got to be the friend to go, and, while they had fun at times, that vacation ended up being a disaster. There were other small ones, though. Like the time he told me he'd never have crab legs anywhere but at a 5-star restaurant. All of the things he wanted to do involved spending money, and a lot of times we'd have to tell him we couldn't afford it. He'd get all mad and say we needed to save our money better. Lol, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. He didn't have to work for all 4 years of college because his parents paid for everything, and they continued to while he took a year off after graduation before finding a job. I was working 10-hour shifts at the time and he'd ask me what's for dinner. When I'd get home from work. The worst part about all of this is that it only took 2 years after finding a job and being cut off financially for everything to fall to pieces. He began relying on drugs, justifying it with his psychology degree, saying he was contributing to science by doing research chemicals. His identity had depended on his parents' wealth so heavily that, when it was gone, all that was left was the guy who liked to experiment with drugs. We convinced him to move home to get help, because he had a bigger support net there. It was too late though, and he ended up odding less than a year later. I used to be the only poor kid on a scholarship as an elite, uppity grad school in Paris. All of my classmates were neck deep in the rich kid syndrome. A few highlights. One classmate constantly complained and whined she was poor and could basically afford nothing. I was empathetic at first. I lived 1h30 away from campus in a one-room student housing unit and had only €45 left after bills were paid to survive the entire month, until I learned she lived in a nice apartment in the center of Paris entirely paid for by her parents, and she received €4,000 per month of allowance despite having no bills to pay and no mandatory expenses besides food. She was just complaining because she couldn't afford weekly international trips, which several of my classmates did basically every weekend, and at most she could pay for a dozen new dresses from Les Galeries Lafayette every month, so she felt poor. I didn't feel bad for her after that, but she kept whining about living in poverty. One classmate had a literal meltdown in the middle of class when another noticed she was wearing an outfit she was seen wearing earlier that month. Apparently, these two girls were shopping partners and had that agreement to throw out all of their clothes after wearing them once, so they'd wear new ones all the time. The first girl had run out of allowance and her parents refused to subsidize yet another shopping spree, so she had to wear the same outfit twice. She had to be physically carried out of class, and she was crying and screaming, as if her entire family had died, because she felt so humiliated. The first day of class, we were invited on a week-long trip to a tropical country for the traditional integration week. I'd been to university 4 years and usually, it is an integration weekend, and is either at an upperclassman's place, or in a cheap, closed location. But nope, my class was planning luxury hotels, casinos, beaches, plane tickets, and you had to pay for all of it yourself. I immediately opted out. One classmate, which, mind you, I'd met for the first time a couple hours earlier, asked me why I didn't want to go, and made a case about all the fun we'd be having. I said I just couldn't afford it. She just dismissed my concern, as if it didn't exist, and said she'd pay it for me. We were talking about thousands of euros. I was so shocked I just thanked her and turned her down, and I didn't go. I didn't imagine she could be wealthy enough to just throw that kind of money away. I was wrong. A few months later, I constantly wanted to strangle her because she'd get her father's chauffeur to bring her sushi plates for lunch daily, and she gloated that she had one of her family's employees write her thesis for her. We had a final exam that happened in a foreign country, mandatory for the entire class, unless you wanted to get a 0 on an important exam, and you had to pay for it out of your own pocket. The teachers were not used to having students struggle to pay the price. I'm not sure how much it'd have been as I ended up not going, but just the plane ticket, hotel, food, temp phone service and transportation on site would have cost over €1,000, so my complaint that I couldn't afford it was met with disbelief. I was accused of trying to get out of an exam I knew I'd fail, and I was told that I was xenophobic and close-minded because I didn't want to travel. Everyone, classmates and teachers alike, laughed and dismissed my explanation that, with €45 a month of income, I just couldn't afford it. That was a very stressful time for me, and I ended up begging a private scholarship institution to help me pay for it. Instead, when they heard the school was making the students pay for a mandatory exam, which is extremely illegal, but nobody ever complained, because students typically could afford it without issues, they contacted the school. I don't know how they managed it, but the next day, I was called into the head teacher's office. A letter from the scholarship organization on his desk, and he begrudgingly allowed me to sit the exam in Paris instead of following the rest of the class. I got a A+, and all my classmates got on my case about it, saying that since I was able to pass the exam, it was absurd of me to refuse to travel with them. To this day, none of them believe money was actually, genuinely the issue, and not my unwillingness to travel. My cousin. He has two rich parents who are separated. Both parents bought him everything he wanted, and didn't want from birth to adulthood. He failed school several times, had the lowest GPA in high school, and there were no consequences for his failures whatsoever. He has 2 cars, goes to college abroad, lives in a fancy downtown. He drinks till drunk, and is a total loser. He's now in college, still fails every semester, and he manipulates family members and friends to get what he wants. When he doesn't, he'd throw tantrums like a 5-year-old, and becomes very rude with everyone around him, including his parents. A few months ago he was trying to get a job after his first semester in college because it's time. He failed to show up to the interview, rescheduled, failed to show up again, then decided to find a job later. He told his parents that he wants to spend his vacation with friends, and his dad got him a $3,000 ticket to travel and spend Christmas abroad after his mother told him that she will no longer buy him anything because he's failed the semester and failed to get a job. This is mainly because both parents spoiled him rotten. He never had to make any effort to get anything he's ever wanted. Both parents tried to compensate him for the fact that they're separated by throwing money at him, especially his father. The two of them also always had contradicting opinions about how he should be raised. His father would do anything to draw him to his side by giving him more money, totally ignoring the fact that he's ruining the kid and his future, despite the fact that all family members have warned him about the consequences of raising him this way. Every time his mother stopped giving him allowance to punish him for something, his father would throw more money at him, just for the kid to feel that he's better than his mother. Moral of the story: do not spoil your kids rotten. Money is never a good way to substitute for love, care, or affection. Never risk your kid's future just to get back at your spouse/ex-spouse. I'm super late to this thread, but whatever. When I was in high school I started dating this older guy who I met at the mall arcade while playing DDR. I was like 16 and 1/2, and he was 20. Red flag obviously. Point anyway, we keep dating, and during that time my dad passed away. Shortly thereafter I was living in a homeless shelter. We continued to date. While I lived in a homeless shelter his parents were uber rich. His mom didn't work. His dad had a multi-million-dollar concert business. Their house had a spare bedroom that was almost never touched. He barely ever worked because he was a lazy loser, but when he did, his dad paid him $20/HR to barely do anything. Point needless to say that even after a year of dating him, they didn't take pity on me and let me continue living in a homeless shelter. In the meantime they bought their daughter a brand new Mercedes, sent her on multiple vacations, etc. Her allowance was $200 a week on top of getting her hair, nails, spray tan, gas, etc. weekly. If she needed more, they'd give it. The kicker, outside of letting me live in a homeless shelter when they could have easily taken me in, was that when I was about to graduate from high school, same age as their daughter, different schools, they told me they were sending her to New York City for a comedy show, and then a cruise, or whatever. They asked me if I wanted to go with her to celebrate. I said yes enthusiastically. Then they told me I'd have to pay for it all myself. Needless to say, I didn't go 10 years later, and I still think they are terrible people. I go to a private high school. Half of the population makes $500K a year, the other half are average and on scholarship. Here's a brief list off the top of my head. Having $1 million doesn't make you in the 1%. It makes you in the like 8%. I have a boat, not a plane. Yeah, it's a pork, but it used to be my mom's, so it's no big deal. My grandfather didn't bust his ass founding a major company for my sister to be a faking English major you've never flown before. Girl, I will bring you to La with me, and we can go first class. No biggie, we have to stay in my grandmother's house while we are getting the pool put in, and my personal favorite, Vanderbilt's not that expensive. Just ask your parents to pay. Also, story time. My dad's a bartender/bar manager, not an owner, not a distributor. I work doing the bookkeeping over the summer. So your dad owns the name of the bar, right? Nah, he runs it. What do you mean? Like he's the manager. He doesn't own the property, why not? Why doesn't he own it? He can make open another route in neighborhood and there can be multiple locations. Heckn't, just buy it? It's like worth a couple $100,000. Yeah. Just take out a loan. Then pay it back. He can't just take out a loan for a couple $1,000s. My dad's a banker. Maybe he can help. Also, you could just take a couple months off income to do that. It's risky, but that's how my mom opened up her second store. He doesn't really get paid. All the money he makes goes right back into maintenance and improving the bar. How? That's not fair. You have to talk to the manager. He is the manager. I worked at a summer camp last summer where the kids were all from extremely affluent families. It was a 7-week-long camp where the kids stayed the whole duration. The price of those 7 weeks for one kid, $13,000, 13 faking grand for one kid, and some of my kids had multiple siblings. I was responsible for 11. Got to know all of them pretty well since we lived in the same cabin. They were 10 to 11-year-old boys and oh my god, the spoiled brat attitudes that I got sometimes was ridiculous. One of my kids was a huge douche all around, didn't pick up his things, destroyed his Yeezys, is that how you spell it, because he wanted to, didn't care about his thousands of dollars worth of stuff, and would always lose things but never cared. Never cleaned his section of the cabin even on cleaning days. The good ones were great. The bad ones were horrible. Another one's parents brought him a crazy looking cookie cake on visiting day that was at least $40 worth. He didn't say thanks or anything to them, just said it looked disgusting and that he'll never eat it, and then just turned away and got preoccupied with his new toys. His parents were pretty awful though too, so within the first 5 seconds of meeting them, I learned that the apple really doesn't fall too far from the tree. The amount of disrespect they showed other counselors or sports coaches was insane too. I know kids can be kids, but these kids came from families that never taught them the value of a dollar, never taught them how to take care of themselves, and never bothered to teach them how to respect another human being. Like I said, the good ones were great. I loved them, and they are gonna do great in life. The bad ones are going to always be shitty people because of the reaffirmation from their parents and not having to face the consequences because they can handle any expense. I deliver for Postmates in rich areas. Normally I do this because these people know how to be civil with the people bringing their food and are decent tippers. I ended up taking what was the equivalent of about $20 worth of food to a really nice mansion in a double-gated community, meaning you have to pass security once and then again when you get to other areas. I arrived at the home and typically never have a problem. The mansion, because there's always somebody there. Family, friends, maid, staff, etc. I got there and left my car in the phone and ran up to the front and rang the doorbell and waited about a minute. I then realized I had to run back to my car to get my phone so I could call the customer and let them know I was outside. The customer didn't answer his phone, and then I hit the nobody available button, which means they have 5 minutes to collect their meal. As always, I sent a text message as well as leaving a voicemail from my phone call. The full 5 minutes almost passed, and I got a text stating that he was not at the house, but at the clubhouse. Typically when people are not their location, I will go to them if they are just right around the corner, if they have a good attitude, but a client can make a special note stating they are somewhere else, but this client did not do so. I began driving around the very large property of mansions, which is probably about 2 miles wide. Now we are well past the 5 minutes and I can't even locate anyone to tell me where the clubhouse is, so I call the client again and get no answer, and I leave another VM. Event texts me back and states that he got my voicemail and the clubhouse is located off the property and down the road. By this time for quite a while I had a button that said nobody is available. I hit it and it made us disconnect and we no longer had contact with each other, and I got to keep his lunch. Guy orders food to his house, deliver food to his house, customer refuses to tell me where he is so I can finish delivery. Early in my career I was working desktop support. One day a senior manager came in with his son and said, "This is my son Poindexter. Put him to work." Later I asked my manager what was going on, and she told me he sits at home playing on the computer all day, so his dad got him a job here. He thought he would be good working in it. We have no say in it. Just go along with it. The kid was incredibly rude to people we supported because 1. He couldn't solve 99% of the problems, and 2. He knew he was protected by his dad. Dexter drove a BMW that daddy paid for. He would say things to people like, "You'll never ride in a car like that." I hated working with this arrogant kid. He didn't need the job. He tossed his dad's name around all the time. "If you don't like it, you can talk to my dad." His dad was somewhat well off because he was part owner of the company along with being a senior manager. At one point there was talk of upcoming rifts. Dexter said to some of us real it people, "I don't have to worry. I'm not going anywhere," suggesting that his dad would protect him from layoffs. I could have punched him in the face. Most of us in the ad department were formally educated, had families and mortgages. It would have presented a real hardship to our families if we were laid off. If Dexter got laid off, he would have gone back to playing video games all day. A layoff would not have negatively affected him in the least. Years later, after I left the company, in large part because of this arrogant idiot who I had to carry most of the time, I heard his dad was forced out of the company. Dexter was let go shortly after. Dexter hit me up on LinkedIn and asked me to write him a recommendation. That's going to be a no for me, dog. TLDR, I worked with a rich kid who was protected by his dad. He was an arrogant little sheet until his dad was let go, and he got canned shortly after. I used to be in a somewhat successful band. If you listen to Sirius Underground Garage 2012 to 2013, you probably heard us. Our singer was going through a really bad ego phase because he hit a specific birthday and started panicking that he wasn't successful and was going to age out of music. He feared no major label would sign an up and coming band with a singer pushing 40. I don't know if he was right or not, but most major country stars are over 40, so. Anyway, he ended up having this guitar student at the place he used to teach. Someone there recommended him not because of his talent, but connections. His uncle had been a tour manager for the Stones, Thin Lizzy, and a few other huge bands. The rest of us were against it. He was only 17, which would make having him on any contracts exceedingly difficult since his parents, who were wealthy as all fuck, would have to sign everything in his place. Singer persisted and brought him on against all of our complaints. In short order, he and singer were butting heads over songs. He and the lead guitarist were butting heads because the kid actually said, "Just let me play some of your solos." While all of this was going on, we started to learn about the new guy. He had over 30 guitars, including a few that were custom built for him, and a few vintage Gibsons, and yet he claimed he hated all of them and never played the vast majority. They just sat in a basement, zero climate control, covered in dust. Same with his amps. He had everything from old Marshall Plexus, Mesas, and vintage Fender combos that Stevie Ray Vaughan world loved. Not good enough. He ended up paying over $10,000, well, his parents did, to get him a full custom audio rig with MIDI capability made by Bob Bradshaw, one of the most legendary amp techs in the industry. Soon, this skeezy manager was hired against most of our wishes. In short order, this guy, most likely at the direction of the kid's parents, started trying to fuck with our sound, claim we didn't have a unified style, and then fired the best drummer we'd ever had. After aborting a recording session, because this kid was such an ass about everything, me and the lead guitarist quit. The band hobbled around with a scabbling oop for about a year, before fizzling out. There are other stories, like the disastrous video shoot we did with him, but those will be for another time. I know a guy who I will refer to as P1. His family is stacked on cash. I hate him. He's 14 years old ATM. One day, when I came to visit his father, because we like to talk about anime, no joke, he's an anime-obsessed millionaire. He wanted to play Fortnite on his Xbox One X. It didn't work for some reason. It didn't work for him the whole day. He was pissed and enraged as shit. The next morning, P1 disappeared from the house. His father phoned me, and I immediately arrived. He obviously called the police. We searched for him everywhere, but didn't find him. In 5 hours, we get a phone call from the police, saying P1 was spotted in Cary, North Carolina. Police picked him up and returned him to his father. Apparently, he snuck out at night and shut down all cameras, then stole their car and went to North Carolina. He is 14, so we were surprised he even knew how to drive. He tried to find Epic Games HQ and force them to fix his game. The police also happened to find $20,000 in the car. Before he returned, the college was already over, so I went back to my home. So I have no clue what happened to P1. Summary: P1 got pissed because Fortnite didn't work. He stole a car. He bribed people who figured out a kid was driving a car. Border Patrol. He tried to find Epic Games HQ and ask them to fix the goddamn game. Wife's best friend comes from a family where her mom owns 3 different businesses. Stepfather is a realtor for the richer parts of town. Grandfather is an MD and grandmother comes from old oil field money. Point: she's a piece of work. Doesn't believe in wearing the same outfit twice. Always has the newest phone. Carries around expensive bottles of liquor for whatever reason. Point: she's tried giving us her old stuff like a 40-inch TV because it wasn't big enough. One of those smart Samsung washer and dryer sets because it was the year before model. Point: her grandparents bought her a $180,000 home for her and her now ex-husband, to which she beached because it wasn't in a rich neighborhood. Her mother then had her construction company remodel the entire house. She complained the whole time about how they did stuff and would go put holes in walls that she didn't like the color of it, spill paint on flooring she didn't like. When her and her husband split up, she couldn't afford the bills on her own and her mom wouldn't pay them, but instead bought her another house and is remodeling it once again. Point: I've had to run her off from my house for telling me how to raise my children and for telling me that I should have spent more money on my wife's car and anniversary gift. Luckily my wife is done with the friendship over stuff like this.